Good morning. I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to do a roll call. Councillor Shortreed.
Present.
Councillor Dayu.
Here.
Councillor Barry.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Danielson. Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Sorry, I was on mute. I'm present.
And Mayor Moffat. I'm present as well. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Shortreed, be it resolved that the August 26, 2021 special meeting agenda be approved.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, we'll move into planning business, the item of the day, and bring in Rick and Sean. And that's right. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Sean, if you would take it away. We're starting with your report to do the overview of the discussion for the last meeting.
Yes, so we've summarized some of the changes that were discussed at our previous meeting in this report. So if there's any questions, we can certainly address those, or we can move into the discussion items identified in the report.
Yeah, I think for the first section, prior to the section entitled home occupation, I think I would just look to council to ensure that clarity is there, and if there's anything that they want to discuss about those itemized changes or discussion items from the last meeting. And if not, which is what it looks like, then we can go to the home occupation, continuation of that. Home occupation and home industry, I think, was a discussion item. So Sean, if you want to take us through that. Oh, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Yeah, I did have a couple of quick questions. Nothing that needs a whole lot of discussion, but and I think I'm going from the chart. I'm under 365 about farm. I think the wording says that it may include a dwelling, and I wondered whether it shouldn't say shall include a dwelling.
It was changed to shall.
And under 4.8, construction standards, Sean had offered a suggestion that we could look at limiting where construction standards could be less. And if you recall, I had a bit of an issue with construction standards, and I wondered if we couldn't maybe consider where those standards could be reduced.
Sean?
So yes, we could. Sorry, I'm just reading the notes here quickly. We can't prohibit them outright, but we could limit them to, say, the shoreline residential 2 zone, which would be your seasonal access properties.
Or was there one suggestion to on certain specific types of roads?
Right. So the SR2 would be seasonal access, so roads that are not maintained in the winter, or water access properties.
Yeah, and did we talked about that last time, I thought? You're just clarifying, Liz, are you? Or are you looking for something different?
Well, I am clarifying. I'm just still very concerned about the number of people who are taking their cottages and turning them into to permanent homes, but not changing the construction standards. And, you know, at some point in time, there being liability associated with that. I know what the building code says, but when I saw that there was an option that we could consider, and which I don't think we discussed at our last meeting. I just wanted to bring that one point up.
Yeah, I think we discussed that at the first meeting. What number is that, Liz, please?
4.8.
.8, so away back in the chart. Okay, so Sean, where are we on that? Because we have discussed this before, so they are being allowed because they are permitted under the code.
Yes, so what the bylaws worded right now, you could build to a lesser standard only in the SR2 zones or for a hunt camp.
Mhm.
That's what we had discussed. So that doesn't mean that doesn't prohibit someone from building to a higher standard, but they could build to the lesser standard only in that seasonal access zone.
Okay, I didn't understand that it was only in the seasonal access zone. So that works for me. I just wanted to make sure because of the additional comment that Sean had put in, I thought, okay, maybe we need to have a quick question about that. So that's good. The only other item that I had that was from previous discussions was 4.16 about garden suites. And I'm not sure that we landed on them being included in the percent of lot coverage. Which I kind of thought they should be, but I think we landed on them not being included.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yes, we had opted to not include them in lot coverage because they are a temporary structure. They're not a permanent structure.
I guess my fear was that in some cases, things do become permanent structures, whether we like it or not. And
Well, if it became a permanent structure, it would no longer comply with the bylaw at that point.
Yeah, that becomes an enforcement issue. And if they're registered and they have and they expire on the sale or transfer of a property, then there's a way to track them.
okay,
Okay, so I had sent out an email to council outlining how, as chair, I intended to take us through today's meeting. So Liz has taken us right down to number 5, and we're still on number 1. So we will circle back for an overall follow-up at the end. So if we could follow the plan, I'd appreciate that. So we can circle, at the end, we're going to circle back, and is there anything else that you want to revisit or get clarification on? But I wanted to take us through Sean's report, then go back to the chart that we had left partway through, pick up on a couple of items members of council said they wanted a breakout discussion on, and check on maps, and then circle back on anything else, and then go to Sean and Rick for next steps in terms of the public process. So if we can carry on with Sean's report, we are at the home occupation section. So Sean, take it away.
Yes, so here, I guess we're just seeking clarification on where, well, if a home occupation can take place in an accessory building, which I believe the intention from our previous discussion was to allow, as well as to limit the range of home occupations that would be allowed on a seasonal access road. So just looking for further direction on those points.
Yeah, and I think the information that you received from Dysart makes good sense. That clarifies it much more toward the intent. And I think the other part we need to bring into this is the whole medical or healthcare section. we had talked about previously about having some challenges around that, given the changes in the community today, and what we do and don't want to have in the community. So looking for thoughts from council on the Dysart definition of home occupation, which allows people to work in certain places at home. Liz?
Actually, I thought that gave us some clarity. I quite liked the Dysart approach.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. So what does council, the rest of council think about that? The Dysart definition. Making sense? Okay, that looks like it's making sense. Lisa Berry.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Where I'm just wanting clarification is where it says a home business or occupation is not permitted in zones that do not have public road frontage.
Mhm.
So are we saying that they would not be allowed on any SR2?
They're not allowed on private roads.
Any home occupation?
So that's what the intent is, yeah. And we have to remember, we can say that you can't have a green cat. There's always somebody who has a green cat. Like there are people that are doing things contrary to zoning all the time, but we don't have we do not have the luxury of bylaw enforcement people who are just patrolling and tracking these things down. So we do rely on it to be complaint-based, which can be difficult at times. The idea, we talked about this in the very first meeting, that private roads are taken care of by the people who pay to take care of it, and to allow somebody to run a business on a private road that may be contradictory to what their neighbors want isn't something that we should be weighing into, because if there are any challenges or problems, it'll come back to the township to solve, and which would be just an enforcement nightmare. I think, Rick, do you have your little hand up there on purpose?
Sorry, yes, I did. I was just going to make a couple of quick suggestions on that. I think the approach that I thought was being considered is that we would add, like for instance, the home office situation would be allowed throughout where any residential use is allowed. But recall our previous discussion as well, we had talked about the artisan studio, which again would be probably similar to that. So that's the creative arts that are usually a one-person operation. I remember that was our original discussion on the home occupations. Would also be recognized in all of the spots where a residence is permitted. The other home occupations or home businesses, I guess that's where the question of accessibility, and again, like you said, liability and trespass come in. If you have a right of way to your property, that right of way does go to guests of yours or people that are invited to your property. So I don't know that there's a municipal liability issue on that, but there is definitely, I think, a concern of activities that would generate a lot of traffic, and I think in the case of Dysart as well, the home business, clearly states that there's only occasional customer client visitation to the dwelling unit. So that's a bit of further qualification on it. So you might have the medical practitioner or the massage therapist that has a couple of people a day or 2 or 3 people a day that might come into the site. Again, not necessarily a problem. If that person has staff, which would not be permitted under the home occupation use anyway. But if they had staff and had constant cars coming in and out, then it would not meet the intent of the home occupation section.
So I'm not sure about your connection, Rick. I think I got about 2/3 of what you said.
I'm sorry. Okay, I guess, like I said, home office, if the way Dysart are doing it, the home office permitted throughout. I think we were talking about the artisan studio being permitted throughout, the home occupations, other home occupations. They're still qualified by the infrequency of use or public contact, but it's still up to council to decide where they should be permitted.
So yeah, I think if you leave it like that, it's too wide open for people to take advantage. And I think we do need to be careful about making decisions that affect the private roads that are chosen and maintained by the people who pay to have that done. So, you know, when does occasional become not occasional, and who fights that battle? So if somebody is doing something, if somebody has an occasional visitor, and then someone starts to like what they do, and they have 3 visitors a day, and then 4 days a week, and like at what point, what's the threshold for the township having lost its management of those occupations? So I think that's what we need to talk about. Councillor Dayu.
A question for Sean, I suppose. If someone, say we were to say, right, no home occupations on private roads, but you can always appeal that. You can always bring a request for an amendment. Do we have a process in place that could consider that request? Is there, would that follow a similar pattern as to our other rezoning amendment requests, where there's a public meeting, et cetera, so that, say there's a private road with only 3 homes on it and they're all in agreement, there's a readily available way that they can make that change? Because we do have very short private roads, you know, with literally two cottages on, and then we've got private roads that go on for kilometers. So I wonder if the appeal process is where we should be looking to make sure that it's at least possible.
Yes, so someone could apply for a zoning bylaw amendment in a situation like that. And it would just have to be evaluated on its own merits and make sure that it's, you know, in line with the policies of the official plan. So it would be a review, and it would go to council for a decision ultimately. But yes, there is a process in place for that.
But
You go ahead, Jen.
sorry, but would that would then necessarily include public feedback? So we would have the opportunity to put that to the folks on the road, and they would have the opportunity to weigh in as part of that process.
Yes, that is correct.
So I'm
Except if a road is many kilometers wrong, and the distance for inclusion in a zoning bylaw amendment is 400 meters. What's the distance?
120.
120. So you could have the vast majority of people who are technically the owners of a private road who would never be given the legislative opportunity to participate. So now we're back into those layers. How many layers of the onion are you prepared to peel back so that somebody can do something on their cottage, on a cottage or a private road? I think we need to be careful around this. I mean, I think I'm very sensitive to this, because I think it could be a very slippery slope. If somebody were to come and ask to seek a zoning amendment, Sean, they would seek a zoning amendment to be rezoned as what?
It would be for a site-specific exception to allow whatever it is they're proposing, to whatever their home office or home occupation is that they're proposing.
So if somebody sought a site-specific exemption through this proposed process that allowed them to have, I don't know, we seem to be kind of stuck on massage therapy, but you know, massage therapy business, and they only intend to see 3 clients a week, but they sell the property and someone else buys it. Now that's been rezoned to allow someone to run a massage therapy office 5 days a week. Would that be accurate?
Yes, the zoning would stay with the property.
And that right there is the problem for me. So I think it's nice to be nice to the nice people. I think we need to be very careful about opening up what could become a contentious can of worms in the future. We've had so it's the balance of how do you provide legitimate opportunity for some growth and not inadvertently create a monster down the road. That's my concern. Lisa Berry.
I know we have sort of deferred short-term rentals to the county. However, just to think about this, so say that we allow short-term rentals on SR2 properties, would that not be considered a home occupation? Because I think that's a bit of a double standard, that you can allow someone to rent out their property to strangers or whatnot. However, someone that wants to, have a small business on a property that maybe the odd person wouldn't even know about, to be honest, versus, every weekend or every 3 days, there's a change of occupation. I think it's a double standard. I know we haven't discussed that, but I think it's something to be considered.
Well, short-term rental wouldn't be a home occupation, it would be a commercial endeavor. So your point isn't, you're not wrong, but it's not somebody renting their cottage out to strangers every 3 days or every week isn't a home occupation, because they're not conducting their business in the home. The home is the business. So it would be commercial.
Have we defined it?
In theory, but it's still a problem, yeah. Yeah. Thoughts from any of the planner men, either of the planner men?
Well, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like a home office defined by Dysart might be something that council would be willing to entertain in the SR2 zone, the seasonal access, where you're not really having any customers come to the property. And the home occupation and the home industry, where you may have customers coming to the property, would be limited to really the SR1 zones and properties that have frontage on a public maintained road.
I mean, I'm happy with the way this is written. I really struggle if council's interested in broadening the permissions of what's allowed on private roads. I think it's a slippery slope, and it needs a whole lot more conversation in terms of defining what those things could and couldn't be. I think it would be folly to accept this Dysart definition as one we believe in, and then not have any further conversation about exactly what it is we do mean by office, business, occasional, because that to me is the slippery slope. Sean?
Now, also just to clarify, a home occupation is permitted in the SR2 zone currently. So if council wanted to remove that, that would be removing something that's currently permitted from the bylaw.
Including on a private road?
That's correct.
If that's the case, then how did we end up having this big conversation about this?
I believe it came down to more of the medical practitioner part of it, and potential client traffic from that use.
Yeah, I mean, I think like occasional is fine. I guess I go back to my initial question is, if somebody's gonna, sell insurance or, do a little bit of, private mortgage brokering out of their property, that's fine, because they're not gonna see a lot of people. What I have concern about is, as I said from the outset, is when does occasional not become occasional? Who says so? And then what is the township going to be expected to do about it? That's my concern. I don't want us to make any decisions that just create yet another thing that we cannot enforce. We already have a whole bunch of things we can't enforce, unfortunately. So that's what I'm looking for, is some more refinement on that part. Liz and then Lisa.
I think there's a little, for me, there's a bit of confusion when you look at what our definitions are: home occupation and home industry, and Dysart's home business, and then a home occupation. Like they talk about a home business, as being one that's a kind of minimal 1 or 2 residents, like a home office is fine in all zones. And then it says a home business again, or occupation is not permitted. And to me, there's some confusion there. I mean, to me, I don't have any issue with somebody who wants to simply set up their office, like we have an office in our home right now, anywhere. I can't see a problem with that. It's when you get into the industry where you've got, or commerce, where you've got more traffic, more people, And you know, I even have a bit of a problem with the whole medical clinic. Our definition of medical clinic suggests something much more than a massage therapist. And I know a massage therapist could create a lot of traffic or not very much at all. But you know, I think that I'm a little bit confused with Dysart's definition, because they seem to, there's conflicting, it's a bit conflicting.
And so I don't disagree in this. I went back to the notes from my very highly annotated draft, and we had talked about initially home occupation, in the definition, an occupation conducted for, and we seem to have added financial gain that is carried on in accordance with provisions of this bylaw as an accessory use to a single detached dwelling. And so my pencil notes say things like examples: graphic design, sales, you know, sewing, etc. Very, very benign things. So if somebody's getting their trousers hemmed, that's fine. If we take that and fold it into the Dysart definition, I still land back, which I think maybe Liz is what you're saying, I still land back on the occasional. So I think there's more discussion or clarification needed on when occasional is not occasional, and then what happens. Then, because we also don't want to say, look, we support this. COVID has really allowed people to come and create and do and share and sell. That's perfectly understandable. But at what point does that become a full-time business where other people on the road are going to call the township and say, it's not occasional, there's 10 people in there every day. And then now that we've made that decision and allowed it, how do we pull it back? How do you govern? How do you enforce? How do you manage that? That's where I'm stuck. I'm going to go to Sean because he's the planner, and then back to Jen.
Yeah, defining what would be considered occasional, there's certainly some complications and challenges there. I think the intention really is it would govern itself, because a home occupation can only be, the only employee can be the person residing in the residence. So you really only have one employee. So you're not going to have multiple employees working on the property with serving that much more clientele.
Yes, there aren't 10 seamstresses hemming pants.
Exactly, yeah.
Jen, and then, sorry, Angie, did you have your hand up a minute ago?
I did, yeah. My thought process has changed slightly, so if you don't mind, I'll just wait for a moment.
Okay, I'm going to Jen and then to Lisa.
I think you've really landed on it for me as well, Madam Mayor, with the question of what does occasional mean. One thing that I would absolutely hate to see happen is for studio tour season to come up, and Halliburton, you know, across the county, we've got these beautiful studio tours happening, and in Muskoka and down in Prince Edward County, and it's a beautiful fall day and everyone wants to go, and there's nothing happening in Algonquin Highlands because all of these private roads aren't able to have studios in them that people are welcome to go down for literally 2 weekends out of the entire year. So I'm hoping that we can figure out a way that offers the spirit of what we mean by occasional, without having to get into the nitty-gritty number of you know, number of people or number of cars or number of days or whatever, but something that really genuinely clarifies the spirit of the sense of occasional, so that if there is a complaint, we can go by the principle behind the bylaw and try to make a decision therein. But, you know, to not be able to participate in studio tour season because of this would be such a shame. You know, we want a vibrant community, and I think if we have to drill down on a single definition in order to make it a possibility, then we should, and I'm willing to put in that time.
Yeah, I think that's the important part is this isn't about shutting anything down. It's about appropriate management in consideration of the nature of the community and what it is we're trying to do for opportunity. Lisa Berry.
Just earlier when you were talking about, you know, the road isn't maintained by the township, it's a private road. There could be problems with that. I mean, there could be problems with people, you know, someone goes to their cottage and they want tranquility, and There's constant traffic coming in and out of the same road for recreational reasons. Like I know on our Cottage Road, a couple weekends ago, there was, 25 people that showed up with ATVs for the weekend and went in and out and in and out and in and out and in and out for 3-4 days. So I think the road as one of the reasons, it's a part of it, but I don't think that can be the guiding principle.
Yeah, I think the difference is that the people that were there with the ATVs for the weekend, they went away. So it's not allowing someone to run ATV tours every weekend, which wouldn't be a home occupation because it wouldn't be one person in an office. Like, I think to Jen's point, we have to be careful not to get too much into the nitty gritty. We're trying to find a generalized idea of how to offer opportunity for people that doesn't become a word I can't say in a council meeting, so I'll say circus. Because I think I feel like, the big doom and gloom lady, but that's where we are. COVID has shown a lot of people that, it's more important now to govern for the bad apples. And unfortunately, the good apples have to suffer the consequences of that. There are an awful lot of people who are willing to push the envelope, press the boundaries and be very self-serving in what they want from and in this community. So again, it's balance. How do we determine what the right thing to do is around this so that we're not putting our mean old grumpy thumb on people, but we're also not opening up a can of worms. Liz.
I thought that we had come to an agreement at our during our last discussion that studios would be allowed, which should address Jen's concern, about studio tour. That would be the last thing in the world that I'd want to see us end, is because, the whole studio tour, the whole, artists in Haliburton is part of our identity. I don't know. I think that we're confusing home occupation and home industry. And I kind of said that before, because it's the home industry that I see as being, something that could become very problematic on a private road, whereas a home occupation, not so much if you're talking about a single person operation.
Yeah, and let's be very clear. This conversation is in no way going anywhere near shutting down artists for studio tours. So let's just make that's just an example. That we're not considering going backwards. We're considering what are the opportunities or the limits of home occupation. So if there's support for what Dysart has, it's a professional practice, which is, selling insurance. And we had talked previously about people who might do graphic design from home, or they might be, my office at home is in a very nice office attached to the garage. It's not even in the house. I couldn't have an office in the house. So I think we're back to clarifying this, as Jen said, the spirit of what this is intended for. It's for people to be able to work at home, but not have people coming in and out all the time. And people are going to come in and out all the time if it's studio tour a couple weekends a year, but they're doing that now. So it doesn't matter. That part doesn't matter. This is about home office work. Liz.
But if you're going with Dysart's description and the professional practice as defined in the way they define it, that would preclude artisans. Because I wouldn't call an artisan, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't call an artisan a professional practice.
Right, and so
no, I'm not saying that it's not a professional business, but when you talk about the word professional, I'm thinking about lawyer, accountant, somebody who's got a degree.
I don't understand the laughing, but no, you're right, Liz. When the general worldview of professional practice is lawyer, accountant, insurance broker, those kinds of things. Absolutely. I'm going to go to Rick because he's a planner and he's got his little hand up. Rick, if you're talking, we can't hear you because you're on mute.
I had thought I unmuted and I guess I didn't again. My apologies. To respond to Liz's comment, the artisan studio we had talked about before is recognized as a form of home occupation, would be permitted. And I think the way to deal with that, to make that very clear, is on the table of permitted uses, we have a list of accessory uses. We'll add artisan studio to all zones that allow that, based on the way Sean had explained it before. We'll do the same thing with home office. The home occupation, we will remove, based on the direction that the discussion seems to be going, is that the broader home occupation would be taken off of the SR2 zone. So the change that would be going in the bylaw from the discussion would be to have a bit more of a restriction on the home occupation uses in the SR2 zone than what is currently the situation on it. But you would be allowing the artisans and you would be allowing the home office. And if there's anything else that needs to be added as a specific kind of home occupation, that can be added as well.
Thoughts from council on that? Liz?
You know what, I still think we're talking about home occupation and home occupation instead of home occupation and home industry. And to me, that's where the split is. And I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form that studios are not a totally legitimate operation or business. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be allowed. I think they should be allowed in all zones. But I'm going back again to Dysart's description where they talk about home business and differentiate between the two instead of calling one home business or home occupation and the other one an industry. And it's the industry to me that creates more traffic, more people. That's where I see the concerns coming in.
But the definition of that Dysart has that we're discussing is the home occupation or home business. I'm sure that they also have something for home industry like everybody else would. Would that be accurate, John?
Yes, that is.
So to your point, Liz, this is just using occupation and business interchangeably, but it's the same category. Industry is the electricians and the welders and the auto bodies and the mechanics. So that's industry and they can't be there. So we're talking about someone running a little business quietly down a road and whether or not it should be anywhere. So I think it sounds to me like we all agree that the home businesses, the definition is fine, except from what I'm hearing is that it should be allowed on private roads. Is what I'm hearing. I think I'm hearing from you folks. Liz is saying no. So Liz, you don't want.
I'm honestly, I'm confused. I really am. I find that the definition that Dysart's got, it's not clear because they're saying home business is okay. And then they're saying home business isn't okay. Without really defining the difference, other than saying a professional practice.
Well, that's why I was saying that I think we need to be really clear in our understanding of what we think is acceptable. So there's two things then that I think I'm hearing is we do need to flesh out what we think the neighbors will support on private roads. Because the very last sentence of the Dysart one says a home business is not permitted in zones that do not have public road frontage. And everyone on the screen is saying, no, they should be allowed on private roads. So if you drew a line through that just takes that off the table. Then we're back to, okay, we think that home business, home occupation or home business should be allowed given COVID and all the folks that are able to do things on private roads at their cottages or their seasonal homes, or maybe they've moved here. There's lots of opportunity there, but what are those opportunities? And so we know that it's not a dentist's office, and we know that it's not a car mechanic because that's a home industry. So we're talking about insurance, artisans, a seamstress, a graphic designer, a writer, they're all pretty innocuous, quiet, one-person shows is the idea.
Yeah.
I'm seeing nods, so I'm getting warmer. And that if that's what you want, that just might make the difference. But we're still stuck at clarifying for ourselves when occasional does not become occasional. What's the mechanism or the threshold where occasional is no longer occasional? And to Jen's point about studio tours, I don't think anybody cares about that. So I had a couple of busy weekends a year and there's lots of visitors and someone's having a good time, and they're not running a studio tour every day, 5 days a week, or every weekend year round. The whole point to me is creating a situation wherein we allow businesses that then get somehow out of control because we haven't clarified them well enough. And then people will come to the township and say, you need to do something about that. And it's too late. Jen.
Special events is a term that jumps into my mind, because a special event, by definition, is not something that happens every time the doors open. It's not special if every time a door opens, that same event happens. So a special event has to prove itself by being different from the norm. So if we say, you know, these sorts of occurrences are permitted, but only for occasional use, such as special events, then that could help to clarify, you know, that difference.
Okay, so how about if we go back to the definitions? What's interesting is home industry provides a number of suggested home industry, a small scale industrial use such as carpentry shop, metalworking shop, welding shop, or electrical shop that provides services or wares to the community and which is accessory, blah, blah, blah. Home occupation just says it's carried on in accordance with provisions. The work we need to do is in the definitions. I think we're focusing on the wrong part. So you're saying that you support the use, the occasional customer and client visitation to a person's small, quiet, innocuous business on a private road. The definition should say, such as artisan, graphic design, sewing. Like, why does the home industry definition give examples and the home occupation one doesn't? That actually might sort us out. Lisa.
At our last meeting, it seemed to be that we were stuck less on the definition and more on the fact that a home industry had to be within a home, and home occupation had to be within the home, where a home industry could be a secondary building. And just before we leave this discussion, I think that we need to define that as well, because it plays into the discussion.
So we did that last time, Lisa. Section 4.19, allow home occupation in an accessory building. You asked for that, and there was some discussion around that, and that was included.
All right, I missed that. Where is
it's in Sean's report above the words home occupation, section 4.19.
Okay, sorry. I must have read that, but then went right into home occupation.
So would that satisfy what we seem to be stuck on, is that if we flesh out the definition of home occupation, then that would, to Jen's point, would help capture the spirit similarly to the definition of home industry. Liz.
I'm sorry, I want to go back to our thoughts about professional occupation, and I might have been in error there, because I mean, I made the assumption when you talk about professional that we're talking about a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, somebody with a degree. And if you actually look at the definition of professional, it's anybody in a business who's occupied, in an activity that is for remuneration. So it actually includes a lot more than just those types of occupations.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, because it's the I don't think that's never been the intent. I mean, you can't have a doctor's office down a private road. That's not what this is intended. But then we're back to the point of what's the spirit of it. So I feel that if we can flesh out some examples of home occupation, that would capture, again, to Jen's point, that would capture the spirit of what we're trying to say here, of what is allowed. Sean.
So the home occupation does reference a business professional office, I believe it is, which is a defined term. And the difficulty with making specific recommendations of what those could include, like insurance sales or say a planner's office or a lawyer, there's just such a large range. It's difficult to list all of those possibilities. And that's why the definition of a professional office, I think, it is included in that home occupation, to try and capture what that home occupation would be, which would be just a professional office setting contained within the dwelling or the accessory building.
But to Liz's point, then the dentist is a professional office. Why can't I run my dentist's office there? Because it's medical?
Yes.
Two people
Yes.
are nodding.
So there was a proposal to include a medical office as a permitted home occupation in this draft, but we can remove that. The reason we did include a medical office is it would be a sole practitioner. However, it sounds like council would not be in favor of that, so we can certainly remove that. So a medical office would not be permitted in a home occupation.
I absolutely do not support a medical office of any sort being included in home occupation at all. I think that's a slippery slope. That's a very dangerous slippery slope. Angie Bird and then Lisa Berry.
I think Sean hit it on the head here, and I think under section 4.19, because the definitions can become so broad of what can be included, by including what is there that can't be in a home occupation, I think that solves it. So we can't have a private hospital, a nursing home, boarding house, eating establishment, or a veterinary clinic, but may include a broad range, which includes a business or professional office. I think as long as we define what can't be there, it allows a broad range of what can.
So we're okay. Yes, we could. Does that not then leave us open to somebody being able to say, well, it's not listed anywhere, so I can do it? And does it matter? Is it because it could be covered somewhere else? Sean?
It ultimately would be up to staff's interpretation of what falls under a professional or business office. Because it is such a broad definition, it is open to interpretation for sure. But I think now also just to clarify that if we were to not allow a medical clinic, this section essentially remains the exact same as what it currently is in the zoning bylaw. And this has not been something that we've typically run into issues with in the past.
If we've had this long conversation and landed where we started, I think I'm going to put a pencil in my eye. Right.
Just as one additional point, we actually don't define professional.
But that's been the crux of our conversations.
Yeah, I know.
Are we talking about dentists? Are we talking about insurance sales by one guy? Like this is. I wasn't in this meeting. I would find it very entertaining. John.
We do define a business, professional, or administrative office.
Oh, I'm looking in the wrong place.
Jen, tell us a joke.
Oh, I wish I were funny, but I'm really, really not funny. I sorry to do this, but I do get back to the whole medical office thing. I understand we don't want, necessarily a doctor with two nurses, etc., working out of their basement. But in RMT, again, I keep getting back to the smaller services that would provide a real asset to our community for small things that the person a kilometer down the road would be so appreciative of doing close to home rather than having to go into Halliburton Village or whatever it might be. So are we back to saying that an RMT wouldn't, or a podiatrist would not be able to work out of their home?
I would think that that's why the definitions of professional practice need to be, and medical need to be looked at. Sean?
So yes, those would not be permitted because they would fall under the definition of a medical clinic. And that being said, someone could always apply for an amendment to the zoning bylaw for a site-specific amendment in those cases. The zoning bylaws, it's a broad document that applies to the entire township, and that may not be appropriate on certain properties, but it may in other situations. And I think that's where the important thing is. In those cases where it could be entertained, they would have to go through a public process in order to be allowed to do that.
So then we're back again to the idea of, if site-specific zoning is allowed to be applied for, you run the risk of somebody who applied with the good intentions of seeing 4 people a week, and the next person who comes in there could see 7 people a day. And then you're back to the neighbors calling the township to say, oh my God, it's like 401 on this private road, leafy lane that we're trying to walk the dog on, and there's every hour there's a new set of people coming in. So I don't know. Jen and then Lisa.
And I believe Rick has his hands up too. Could we hear what he has to say? I don't know. If
Yeah, okay, we can. I don't, I'm sorry, Rick, I'm better with, actually I'm mediocre with hands in the air, and I'm terrible with little yellow hands up in the corner of the screen, so.
That's all right. And I know the color behind me is, the color behind me sometimes loses my hand. As a follow-up to what Sean was saying, also as far as the procedure, you can also look at this type of situation on a temporary use bylaw perspective, so that you are limiting either the length of time that it could be going on, and also put the conditions on it so that it would actually expire, as we talked before with the garden suites, on a change of ownership. Then that would not necessarily follow through. The temporary use also gives the public the view of saying, and if you're limiting the occasionality, so to speak, on a site-specific application, then you can regulate that. So maybe the approach here would be that when you're considering that type of amendment, you do it as a temporary use situation.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
But that's only to say that somebody actually applies to go through that process, because there will be people who don't understand or care about it. They'll do whatever they want.
That's true, and that does go back to your enforcement. If somebody starts something, a neighbor complains, and it doesn't fit the criteria, then they're in contravention of the zoning bylaw. You give them the opportunity to apply to bring it into compliance with the zoning bylaw, or shut them down, as the case may be. So, I mean, that's no different than any activity going on anywhere in the municipality.
And so if you were to provide for an amendment and a temporary use provision, as part of that temporary use provision, would the township be able to limit, to enforce, I'll turn that around, to enforce occasional? To say you can't have somebody coming in every hour, 5 days a week under your temporary use amendment, but you can have 3 people a week or 3 days a week or something.
I guess we'd have to think about that one through, and probably talk to the township solicitor on it. That probably gets more into the issue of licensing, which I don't believe is the case for a lot of activities at the present time. So again, I defer to Sean, or even suggest that might warrant a little bit more detailed discussion, with that particular item.
And I think it bears saying too that I'm going to make up a word, particularity around this issue is having been involved in 2 private roads for more than 30 years. And I'll tell you, folks fight and bicker about all manner of things. And I want us to be careful not to create more opportunities for people with differing ideas of how roads should be used to have more disagreement or angst. Jen and then Lisa.
So I completely understand that. And yet here are the people that I'm thinking about and sort of this is the filter through which I'm trying to pass the conversation right now. In our ongoing endless COVID experience and looking towards post-COVID, there's a huge demographic shift in Ontario, absolutely vast. People want to leave the cities, they want to leave their condos, they want to leave the suburbs, they want to take their home office, which they are now permitted to do, or their home whatevers, which they're now permitted to do because they can work online with clients, etc., and move into a place where they can raise their children, where there's goodness and greenery and running water, because there's a flexibility that exists now that never did before. Are those people who are considering this township and other townships like ours going to be comfortable making a move with their small families and their specific skill set and their vivacity for life to the township of Algonquin Highlands if they do not know upfront that they can bring their vocation with them? So if we say, no, thou shalt not, but you can apply for an amendment, they don't know, they can't apply for that amendment until they own the property in which they want to establish this business. So to what degree are we risking having an overly, and I know everyone will understand that this is in no way a snub, but an overly retirement driven bedroom community when we actually do have an opportunity to bring young families and growth and a variety of services right now into the township? That's the filter I'm kind of passing our conversation through. And I'm not sure I feel comfortable quite yet.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. Where I'm stuck is, of course, the other issue is they can do that if they have internet. Where I'm stuck is what's occasional and what is considered a professional or home business. I'm back to the definitions so that we know clearly. So to your point, Jen, somebody could say, I'm going to buy that property because I know that I can continue to work at home for the bank because I just need, a comfortable chair, a desk, and internet, or I'm an artisan, or a number of things. But when is it not? It's good until it's not. And what is that point where it's going to create angst for neighbors and the township? And I don't know what that is. So that's the hook that I'm stuck on. That's sort of this going around and around my head in circles. Is I can't figure out what that is. I do not want to be or be seen to be trying to put the kibosh on anybody's growth and development in our community and opportunity. But at some point, everybody doesn't get to do what everybody wants just because they own the land. It's our job to put boundaries and parameters in so that a community can flourish without being degraded or creating problems. Lisa Berry and then Deputy Liz.
Just out of curiosity, is like I appreciate the conversation and it's a good one, but are we seeing a huge influx in complaints right now?
Well, no, because you're not allowed to do things.
Pardon?
Well, no, because you're not allowed to do things. Like the things that we're talking, some of the things that we're talking about are perhaps not currently permitted. I mean, we'd have to ask the bylaw guys, but no, I don't think anybody's calling bylaw and saying somebody's knitting down the road and I object. Liz?
I still think that a couple of things that we're confusing the home occupation and home industry. To me, it's the industry that could create a problem with traffic or more people, more so than in that difference. And we also, I think, got a little hung up on the medical clinic thing. Obviously, we don't want a medical clinic in any of these locations at all. But then, Jen, you're waving your hand.
Well, because Jen's trying to split it out so that, no, you're not going to have, a pediatrician seeing 30 kids a day. But to Jen's point, she's suggesting that we're back to the massage therapist again.
Well, I didn't get a chance to get there.
Okay, great. So carry on then.
Well, actually, my niece is a massage therapist, and she sees probably 3 clients a week, and that would not create an issue. You know, I think that there are some things that probably could happen that would be considered in the sort of medical or wellness, maybe wellness field, that aren't necessarily medical, that would not create a problem.
But I think you're circling back to exactly Jen's point. Is that there are some opportunities for folks to be here and flourish here are somewhat innocuous, and others are not. So to me, it's back to what's occasional and who governs that, who manages it, and who enforces it, and what's the threshold where it's no longer occasional. Madam CAO.
I think that's absolutely the crux of it, because with the way I look at a medical facility, there's lots of situations where it wouldn't cause an issue, and it just, like Deputy Mayor says, there might be 3 clients a week. But there is potential in those situations for the business to grow, and the municipality has an obligation to put those businesses in areas where there are services provided. On private roads, those services are not provided. And then if the business grows, there's increased pressure then on the municipality to provide those services. We don't want to put ourselves in that situation. So my recommendation would be not to allow that as of right, but like Sean said, there may be situations where a zoning amendment is considered. We don't get a lot of that at the moment that I'm aware of, but it then does allow for professional ops, those innocuous ones where there's one person working at home, not a lot of people coming and going, and not a lot of potential for growth.
Yeah, and that, going back to what Rick had said about a temporary use that would end with the sale of the property or some sort of discontinuation, that allows the municipality then to be the gatekeeper. So things are allowed, but because we can't control occasional and thresholds and those kinds of things, a potential temporary use would allow that. Would allow the township to at least have an eye on what's going on and be able to address it legally and appropriately should there be any complaints. If we were to say that you could do almost anything you wanted as a home occupation, we have no means by which to pull it back or to control it. So if we put a mechanism in place that allows some control at the front end, then it allows the township to have constant regard for what's happening in respect of road use, neighbor complaints, neighborhood concern, expectations that the township would take over roads or provide more services or that kind of thing. So I do see that as a bit of a gatekeeping opportunity that still allows what Jen's asking for. It still allows that, but it allows the township to retain some control. There's hands all over the place. I'm going to go to Liz, and then Jen, and then Lisa.
Okay, so I'm still stuck on the medical clinic and the definition of it. And do some of these activities actually fit into that definition? Like the massage therapist, or somebody who offers, I don't know, holistic health advice. I mean, I know there's lots of people that offer that sort of assistance, and it's kind of medical, but not. And doesn't really fit into the definition of a clinic, which is
it's almost like but I think that's, to your point, Liz, I'm stitching you together with Jen's point, is that's why Jen's talking about things like, foot care and massage therapy. We're not talking about drugs. We're not talking about needles and sharps. We're not talking about, things of that nature. So then, from the conversation I'm hearing, maybe the definition that needs more hammering out is the medical facility part.
Yeah.
and really hammer that down. Like, it's almost like when we do budgeting, we talk about hard services and soft services. So, you know, roads and snow removal are hard service that a municipality provides. Tennis courts and a museum are what's considered soft services, much to the dismay of many. So if we apply that lens, then we are looking for what sort of light, soft medical services or healthcare services would be okay, occasionally through a temporary use amendment, and have a hard no on a whole bunch of others that are not what we want on the private roads and waterfront properties of cottage country. Maybe that's where we end up. Lisa Berry. Oh no, I was going to Jen and then Lisa.
Yeah, I like the idea of hammering out those details. I really like Liz's word of wellness, because I think that does give us a guiding principle there. You know, what I would hate to see is that someone is allowed to paint nails, but the person who's actually offering, you know, podiatry services can't establish their business while the nail painter can establish their business. And effectively, they're offering the same sort of setup. You know, there's very little difference from the outside between those two sorts of services. So if we could narrow down wellness versus, as you say, the drugs and surgeries and things like that in an appropriate way, I think that would be good. And then again, you know, I like the idea of this temporary usage permit. That makes a great deal of sense. But then I put myself in the position of the 35-year-old couple with 2 young kids who are hoping to come up and make Algonquin Highlands their forever home. What are they going to see when they start looking for properties? What is the message they're going to receive when they start looking for properties? And are they going to be turned off? Or will this temporary usage permit will they be aware of that? I just think that we might be missing out on some great folk if we make it.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, but we also have to remember, again, everybody doesn't get to have everything they want just because they want it. We are providing a venue or a process through which they can achieve what they want. How they find out about it is their business. And hopefully the person they're working with says, hey, these folks had a 4-hour conversation about how you can have your foot care clinic on the cottage road, because they believed in growth and development of families and small business and soft innocuous uses. I mean, it's up to us and the people selling the property to stitch that together. I think our job is to have this conversation, as painful as it does feel at sometimes today, but we're getting there. We're getting there. We're providing an opportunity, but we hold the keys. We're the ones who are charged with making the decisions. And if the decisions that we make to frame the community for its best self going forward require something like a temporary use process, then that's a win, because we haven't said hard no. There shall be no bloodletting, right? There shall be no needles, there shall be no surgeries, there shall be no, that's the kind, if you want to do that stuff, go to a hospital, go to a clinic. But, and I have to say that in the beginning, I was absolutely adamantly against the sort of RMT thing. This conversation has shown me that there is actually an opportunity for some of those innocuous soft uses that are around wellness, and wellness is huge. So let's figure out what wellness means and put some hard stops on that. No bloodletting. Madam CAO, no leeches.
I say that. Sorry.
I just have a question, I guess, for Sean and Rick around just what council's looking for on some of this stuff. So my understanding of a temporary use bylaw, even though council would consider some of these uses in that way, we would still have to, the bylaw would still have to say that they're not permitted. Am I correct on that? Yeah.
Yes, that is correct.
I just want to make sure council is aware of that.
Yes, so it would be exactly a zoning bylaw amendment, but for a temporary use. So they would still have to apply for that. It would still have to be approved by council. So there's still a process somebody would have to go through to achieve that as a permitted use.
And I would absolutely believe that the good folks in our local real estate offices would have done their homework in each municipality enough to know that. So if somebody said, I love this property, but I want to be a 3-day-a-week RMT, that their real estate agent would say, hey, you can, in Algonquin Highlands, you can apply that, you can apply for that. That's their job.
The ones that put signs on waterfront land that doesn't belong to them, you mean?
But, sure, yeah. But, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that goes with real estate people, and that's their job to know the community within which they are attempting to craft a deal. And if we've made, it's no different than all the times for years and years and years before live streaming, we were saying, wait a minute, how come no one knows what we do at the council table? You can subscribe to our agendas, you can come to the meetings, you can read it in the newspaper, you can hear it on the radio. So how come people don't know? This is the same thing. We could put a process in place. That's our job. What happens on the other side of that is up to other people. Lisa Barrett.
I just wanted to mention, like, what happens with, you want to be inclusive, you want, like what Jen, you want to have, you want to have a place where people can come and start something. And I'm thinking of a business that started in Halliburton in a residential neighborhood. And, for 3 or 4 years, they started sort of an online business. The business grew, they became very successful, and then had to move. And because the support of the municipality, they stayed in the municipality, but they invested in a larger building, and they now employ about 25 people. So I think you want to have, rules in place that brings people in, but then there has to be that fine line of when they've sort of outgrown their shoes, like, so that you offer opportunity, but there is understanding that, once you meet this threshold or something, thou shall have to move to a more commercial setting.
Well, and that's, again, I'm making some notes here. We're back to definitions. And so what is our intent? Our intent is to offer, I'll say it again, sort of the soft innocuous uses that contribute and allow, but that have thresholds, to your point, Lisa, after which you need to move along. Way to go. You've springboarded off your private property, and now you need to go into town, into a different place, because you're too big for what the spirit of this was intending for you when you first started. I think that's fair. Mr. O'Callaghan.
That threshold would be as soon as you need an additional employee. Because right now, under the home occupation, you can only have one employee, the person who lives in the house. So that there would be the threshold.
Yeah, so if somebody's coming in to somebody's place on a Wednesday afternoon for foot care, and then they go home, that doesn't matter. But if 10 people are coming 5 days a week, that's a problem. Then we're back to the occasional. So it's not only whether or not you have one more employee, we're back to that definition of occasional. I saw a hand somewhere. Jan. You may not have your hand up, but I know you have something to say. You have 2 hands up.
Just going back a minute and a half, Madam Mayor, to your previous point about how folks can look at the agendas and find out what council is up to, and how it's up to, real estate agents and others to be able to interpret our bylaws and give that information to potential new residents of Algonquin Highlands. I guess we do, however, have 2 really massive assets, which are just starting up. 1, we've got our communications coordinator, and 2, we've got Bang the Table. And when I think of other townships, either in the United States or in Canada, where I've considered visiting for a temporary period of time, sometimes on their websites, they have, information, come live here. Here's what living here is all about. And on platforms like Bang the Table, or like on our website, with the crafty thinking of someone such as a communication coordinator, we might actually be able to give the spirit of welcome by saying, look, tons of stuff are possible. Here's where you got to go to look for you know, the bylaws that we have on the books, but we do welcome wellness. We do welcome other things. There's just a, you know, there's just a process you got to go through, but really giving that sense of welcome to, you know, to newcomers for living here through these beautiful, gorgeous communication means that we've committed and put money towards establishing. There could be a good compromise there.
I actually just wrote down on my little notepad, add build your business here tab on website. So again, that's one more way to put out there. So if we're going to go in this direction, then yeah, then we can build a section of the web. This is not rocket science. Build a section that just says, oh, you want to have a business here. Here's what you can do, and here's how you do it, and here's what you need to read, and here's what you can't do, or where you can't do it. I mean, that's easy enough, but that's at the back end. We're trying to make the decisions at the front end. So absolutely, I don't think that's a difficult thing to manage, but we need to figure out what it is we're doing, and I think we're very slowly getting there. But it is 10:15. Who would like a little break? I sure would.
Okay.
Are you guys, do you want to keep going? We normally break at 10:15 or 10:30, it's your choice. Okay, I'm calling a break. We'll see you back here at 10:30, 15 minutes. Get your coffee filled up. Wellness concepts that would allow a better understanding or further clarification of home occupation. Sean has confirmed a couple of times that the threshold is around the number of employees, that as soon as you need someone else to help you, it's no longer considered a home occupation. So we've also agreed that we could do ourselves and the community a favor by an enhanced service by adding a business options tab to the website, which is separate from zoning, but it's just an additional use. It would seem to me that based on the conversation that with the addition of a temporary use option, that we haven't made very many changes. We've talked ourselves around the same circle a number of times. Excuse me, and I think where we appear to have landed is that the language would stay the same with these additional clarifications and the temporary use option. Sean, would you summarize for us if that's accurate?
Yes, I would say so. Now, to clarify, the temporary use option, that would not be included in the zoning bylaw. That's already something that is available for someone to apply for.
And so then we would, to Jen's concern about people not knowing, that's something that we could say in a new section of a website or just a different kind of communications in that regard. Sean?
Yes, they could do that. They would also, if someone were to contact me and discuss what options are available as far as applying for a zoning amendment, I could present that as an option as well.
And it's existing. It's already an option to do that, to get apply for an amendment. So in terms of the
Rick's got his hand.
extraordinarily robust conversation we've had on home occupation, what are council's thoughts about where we think we've landed?
Rick had his hand up.
I can't see. Oh, there's Rick. There. Yes, Rick, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just one quick comment on that to follow up from Sean's notation. It may be possible that we could add a clause in to the home occupation that would go something along the lines of specific uses may be recognized as a home occupation use through a site-specific temporary use zoning bylaw, so that it would be very clear there. Almost similar to how we did it with the garden suite. We put standards in the bylaw, notwithstanding the fact that any garden suite has to be done by temporary use. So this might provide that bridge on there, and I think that would probably help with Sean's interpretation over time as people call and say, well, it's not clear that this is it. This is the process that's even been identified. And it means that you've made the decision to say, yes, you'll consider those applications.
Yeah, I mean, that would just provide that extra bit of clarity for anybody looking at that. Jen?
I think that threads the needle really well. So we've got the provisions we need to keep things under control within the bylaw, and then we're looking to other means within our bounteous township toolbox to make sure that the spirit of what we're trying to do is also very well understood, including within the zoning bylaw language itself. So no, I think for me, the wellness piece remains. I'm still not entirely sure I understand how that is going to be figured out in the bylaw, but I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and I would look to Rick and Sean to talk to us about that. We still need to look at the medical clinic. It sounds to me that there's interest in certain, with no disrespect to those in these industries, but the softer wellness practices council supports, but things like, doctor, dentist, administration of drugs or surgeries, and those still all fall well within medical, which would not be permitted, but we're looking at some of those, I call them sort of soft and innocuous wellness professions. Is that what council is supportive of? I think I see 2 nodding heads and 2 not nodding, 3 nodding heads. Mr. O'Callaghan.
And so to clarify, those softer medical uses would be the ones we would list as could possibly be entertained through a temporary use zoning bylaw. Is my understanding correct there?
That's my understanding. Can council confirm that that's what you're looking for? Jen?
Yes, but in certain zones. So in SR1, wouldn't that be already okay? And SR2, you'd have to go for the special permit, or am I not? And a private road?
Sean?
No, so home occupation would be more of the medical side of things, or sorry, let me think this through. The home occupation is permitted in the SR1 and SR2 zones. And if we were to change the home occupation zone to not allow medical facilities, but we will have a provision where they could apply for a temporary use for certain softer medical services. They would need to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment regardless of which zone they are in, provided that a home occupation is still a permitted use in that zone.
So Sean, what would have to happen, a zoning amendment process, a zoning amendment application is a public process. It is very often the case that sometimes people think something shouldn't happen and they object to the proposed amendment. But as a planner, your report, in theory, would support that amendment and temporary use. So what would be when would council be able to say no? I mean, council could say no anytime it wanted to, but we rely on our own planning documents to support or deny applications. So in this regard, I'm still looking for avoiding the slippery slope. So if somebody made an application for a zoning amendment for temporary use for one of these things that we think is okay, what's the difference between somebody? I guess the difference between somebody saying, I want to open my dentist office is we've already said it's not allowed. Give me an example of when you, as the planner, would recommend to council that zoning amendment be denied. Because the thing I find frustrating about planning is we often put things in place that our own documentation doesn't allow us to deny. Because then you come forward as a planner and say, yeah, but it's allowed. So what would be an application of this nature that you would say to council, I can't recommend supporting this zoning amendment?
So if someone wanted to establish a medical practice that is not defined on this short list of softer services that we're proposing to put together, then that would make it difficult to support from my perspective. But there would be several factors involved.
And so then would we also be able to, if we were establishing some parameters, to provide the opportunities that we support as a group for our community, that the definitions or the parameters could be not as detailed as we want, but we could say, and and shall not include the administration of drugs. Like, you can't, somebody wants to give you a hot stone massage, that's fine, but they can't prescribe drugs or those kinds of things. Like, there has to, again, look at those thresholds so that we don't have this giant open wound that could occur. And maybe I'm overthinking that. I'll go to Jen and then back to Sean.
I imagine there are medical definitions already in place that we could just find on that define the different level of services provided without having to reinvent it.
Sean, what do you say about that?
We can certainly look and see what sort of definitions are out there. What I was going to suggest is perhaps myself and Rick, we look at what definitions are available, and when we bring back the final draft with all these changes we've been going through, at that time, council can take a look at it and see if we've captured the conversation here.
Okay, is that okay for council? Do you think we've landed at the place where you think you were all headed? Around this, I see Jen nodding and I see three faces not nodding. Lisa?
Just one area, not to overstate it, but it's one thing that we haven't discussed as far as medical goes, and I don't know in the definition if it should be addressed, but something like counseling services, would that be considered medical? Because some counselors would be considered doctors.
Yeah, good point. I think it depends on the if they're just doing it on their own. Like, if there's one person who is a social worker or a psychotherapist and they see a couple of people a week, there's no bloodletting there. There's no needles, there's no drugs, there's no surgeries, there's no mechanized devices for the application of service, there's no that kind of thing. I think that's what I'm getting the impression of where folks want to go. I'm going to go to Sean and then to Liz.
And as we discuss this further, I'm becoming more and more reluctant with breaking out medical services. I really think it may be more appropriate that we deal with these on a site-specific basis so we know exactly what it is the proposed use will be. And at that time, we can make the determination whether or not that is appropriate for this specific property. Just allowing them or breaking them down becomes very challenging, because what is the threshold that we're using to determine whether or not it is in fact a soft medical service, where in fact they are just a sole practitioner on the property.
Yeah, good point. And so, right, okay, Liz.
Lisa's point is a perfect segue to what I wanted to say, to comment on. You have said several times, no drugs, but some kind of a therapist, psychologist, or anybody like that, it could have a professional office in their home and only see limited number of people. I mean, maybe they're a retired psychologist, so they've got a limited number of clients, but they certainly might be able to prescribe drugs.
I don't believe psychologists can prescribe drugs. I think psychiatrists prescribe drugs.
Well, okay, then say a psychiatrist. And I don't see what the impact is on land use, which is kind of, I mean, that's our focus.
Yeah, and at the risk of misunderstanding what you just said, I don't know that it's an issue of land use. It's an issue of compatibility in community and what people want in their neighborhood, knowing full well that some folks have some odd ideas about what you know, what happens in certain facilities, so.
But this is a zoning bylaw. I mean, it is all about land use. I hear what you're saying. It's both.
Sorry? You seem to just cut out there.
Oh.
I heard you say it is, I mean, I know it's a zoning bylaw, but.
So it's about land use. I mean, it's about compatibility, and it's about, you know, specific uses on land in certain zones. And, you know, I guess we could pick apart every suggestion that came to us about the, you know, the possible uses are endless.
Well, they are, and that's the problem, and that's going back to the very beginning of, you know, how do you foster success in a community without creating a disastrous slippery slope? And that's what we're struggling with. Sean.
So my recommendation would be to not include a medical facility as a permitted use within a home occupation. I can see how that may be looked upon as not being very welcoming. However, that being said, there are zones that do permit a medical facility outside of a residential area. And in those particular cases where it may be appropriate to have, say, a massage therapy or one of those lower impact uses, those are the ones we could consider on a site-specific basis, either through a temporary use bylaw or through a full-on zoning bylaw amendment for that property. It does, I think there will be some significant challenges in determining the threshold of what can be considered a low impact versus not low impact medically.
Yeah, and so basically that, as we started out after the break, this just lands us back where we were. But I think it clarifies what council wants in terms of how welcoming we want to be to provide people an opportunity to apply to do that kind of thing. So, I mean, you guys are the planners. If that's from a planning perspective is the way to allow us to be the gatekeepers, as I've mentioned previously, then maybe that is the place to land, and then prop that up with some other information that can be provided to people, to Jen's point, who are coming here and are wondering what they might do, to let them know that opportunity is around, and to Rick's point, that to change some of that language so that anybody reading it knows they have the opportunity to apply for a site-specific rezone. That sort of sounds like the way where we're headed. Jen, is that your hand up, or are you making bunnies there in the air?
Yeah, just to spin the wheel in the opposite direction one more time.
No!
I just wonder, you know, if we then put all medical services back into one category by simply saying it's not permitted, but you can apply for a special permit, then we're sort of, is it not true that we would just be delaying the conversation about wellness versus bloodletting for another date, but we won't have written in stone what those definitions necessarily are in a way that the planning folk can go back to them and make a recommendation one way or the other? Or would we not be just opening up the door for a possible recommendation for bloodletting?
I think we're talking about the former. I think that, yes, we're delaying the conversation so that it's not carte blanche. It is site specific, and there's individual conversations that can happen should someone apply to do that. But I think we also have to have a general understanding that wellness is different from medical. So without breaking out a specific list of things that might be considered, there are some hard stops. There are some absolute hard stops in terms of medical facilities. I'm going to go to Sean and then back to you, Jen.
I also wanted to note that these sections are not exclusive to Algonquin Highlands. These do show up in other zoning bylaws. So if a medical practitioner was going to establish their business here, I don't think it would come as a significant shock to them that they may have to go through some sort of planning process to allow their business to continue to operate from their household here.
Jen?
So where would those hard stops live? If we don't define them in some capacity now for this document, where would that language live?
I see it living in, and Sean and Rick, correct me, but I see it living in section 3.113 under medical or dental clinic. And maybe that would be massaged a bit to take out, you know, osteopaths in there. That's pretty soft, but like I don't want to go to the dentist down a Cottage Road. I don't think that's what our community is about. Massage therapy, I think I've been convinced that somebody who, you know, a little hot stone massage on a Wednesday afternoon isn't such a bad thing. But so to me, the hard stop is medical as opposed to wellness. And there's lots of people who would love to enter into the debate about those two, what falls into those two categories. So to me, the hard stop are at doctor, dentist, optometrist, surgery, that kind of thing. Jen?
No, I completely get that. I understand where we're landing on what those hard stops are. I'm just concerned that if we go to what Sean, I believe, is suggesting, we would lose the opportunity to create that in some written form. And if we are going to create that opportunity and include those definitions and go through that process of trying to figure that out to include it in this document, then why can we not include it and make it, you know, why would we say, no, we're not going to allow it apart from special permit? Oh, but here's all the fabulous work we've done on the definitions, when we can just start applying those definitions now.
Sean or Rick?
What I would propose is to leave the definition of a medical facility as it is. It's a broader definition which captures a lot. I think it's important when we receive an application for a site-specific amendment that we look at all the different factors, you know, lot size, access, things like that, to determine whether or not the specific use they're proposing for that lot would be compatible with the character of the area. Just because it's a massage therapy, that in itself, it may not be appropriate for that lot, depending on the specifics of the property where it's being proposed. But really, until we have all the information in front of us, we won't know that for sure. So
to your point, that point then, Sean, if somebody, you know, we know historically lots were created in a bit of a higgledy-piggledy manner, shall we say. There are lots that are 50 feet wide and there are lots that are 400 feet wide. And so this goes back to what I was asking before. As a planner, if you were bringing a site-specific zoning amendment application to council, and maybe this is what Jen is saying, is where are the parameters that allow you to say it's too small, there's not enough parking, the road's too narrow, the neighbors hate it, or the neighbors love it. And because this is, I feel sometimes that our own planning documents work against us, where we really want to say no to something, but as a planner, you say, it's in compliance or conformity and I recommend support. And we did one of those recently where I openly said, I hate this. And you have said to us, but it's allowed. And if you don't, you can say no, but you could end up at the LPAT. So I also don't want to create a whole miasma of red tape and paperwork and potential visits to the LPAT. And I also don't want us to put something in place that, should it become a site-specific application, we don't have the parameters in place that genuinely allow us with good reason to say no. So that's where, as you know, in the back end of all the documentation has to be built in the check boxes that, oh, well, you have to meet 6 out of 10 for us to say yes, and you only met 3, so the answer is no. As opposed to, well, I get to apply and then I'm going to take you to the LPAT. We could end up with doctor's offices all over the place. We're not going to, but in theory. So I guess that's my planning question is, are we setting ourselves up for failure because regardless of any site-specific application someone might bring, as the planner, you're going to say it's compliant and I recommend council support it? And then we have something we never wanted to have, which would have rendered this entire conversation moot.
So whenever we receive an application for zoning bylaw amendment, we'd have to look for conformity with the official plan. So things like character of the area, lot size, access, as well as the zoning bylaw. So we have to make sure there's sufficient parking on the property, access, lot size, all those things. So it's difficult to say why exactly it may not be permitted. I mean, for example, if we were to allow a massage therapy or entertain a massage therapy and the person lives on an island, I mean, that's not something that's going to be supported by staff. There's a number of complications there. It's just not appropriate from a planning perspective. So it's hard to say specifically without having an application in front of you, but that there are reasons out there not to support the approval of such applications.
Jen?
But if we don't change the definition from how it is now, then what is, then you can talk about setbacks, but you don't have any way of saying, hey, this council in this term would not like to see bloodletting. Is there any way that you would be able to recommend a no rather than a yes on the basis of the work itself, if we haven't specified that definition?
I am reluctant to break out specifics in the medical definition. There's far too many positions out there. It's a very broad definition, and I think to break it down specifically to every single medical practice that's out there, that's, yeah, I have some concerns with that. I think it does need to be on a specific basis of what's being proposed. And then at that time, we can look into exactly what that use is, what the property is. Are the two a good match for a zoning bylaw amendment to be entertained?
And so that's where I'm back to, and maybe this is what Jen's saying, is building in at the front end, the parameters that provide clear direction for you in bringing recommendations to council. I don't want us to go through this entire conversation and have somebody come and make an application of something that is akin to the bloodletting, and we all say, oh, no, we remember that conversation. That's not what we wanted. That's not the spirit of these changes to open up our community, and have you say, well, the language, the OP and the definitions allow it. I think I would shoot myself if that ever occurred, because that's not what we're trying. That's not what we're trying to get to, and this is now where I'm stuck.
Rick has his hand up.
Rick does have his hand up. It looks like a book, but anyway, Rick, go ahead.
So, sorry, I got to find a spot for my hand where it does show.
There you go. That's the one. Put up your right
That
hand.
one? I'll do this in the future. I'm sorry. Just as a quick follow-up to Sean's comments as well. All of the criteria that are under the home occupation are part of that checklist that we would be using in evaluating whether it's appropriate even on that site-specific basis. So you've still got to be satisfied that the scale is small, it meets that criteria, that there is no impact on traffic, that there's no impact on all the other items that are listed off in there. So I think those checks and balances to a certain extent are there, even though you're not saying that, the difference between a massage therapist and a chiropodist, that's something that doesn't necessarily matter. It's how the property is being used and what the impacts are that was generated. And that's in that criteria. So I think that would be the bearing that we would tend to use as planners of saying whether it's appropriate or not, and whether to recommend it to you or not recommend it to you.
Okay, so then if we look at on, I'm not sure what page it is, but the section 4.19, it did say that, so we struck out medical clinic. So would that remain struck out, or would that go back in?
That would go back in.
Just back in.
I mean, I think we know I was really two things. Never believe me when I say a meeting will be over by noon. This is going to come back. It has to come back again, because I feel until we see this specific part broken out, unless council is satisfied with the conversation, I feel I'm getting very clear on some aspects of this and a little bit more muddied in others. So we are already behind our timeline for the zoning bylaw review. We had anticipated that we would be out to public consultation by now. And we still have, this is the first discussion item today, and there's a number to come yet. So just keep that in mind, that I may be calling another special meeting to carry this on, depending on how far we get. I'm going to go to the CAO and then to Councillor Berry.
I just want to clarify that by adding medical clinic back in, it means that we are not including it. So home occupation shall not include a medical.
Right, that's why I asked that. And then, but what's interesting is, so if it, and it wouldn't be medical clinic anyway, because it would be medical or dental clinic.
Yeah.
For it to be consistent. Okay, so, right. So that makes a little more sense, that it would not be, it would remain out with the caveat that there would be a site-specific application process. But I think we're still, I think councils, particularly Councillor Dayu, are still looking for whether or not there's any hard stops. And I think, Sean, you're saying no, and Rick's saying the same thing, that the section 4.19 has enough stopgap measures for staff to recommend the things that the hard stops that we are discussing that we don't support, but would still allow enough of the sort of softer wellness services, again, with no disrespect to practitioners thereof, that they would be considered. Would that be correct?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, looking at the first point of home occupation, it does have to be clearly secondary to the main residential use of the property and not change the residential character of the dwelling. So it's really up to staff interpretation on what the use is that's being proposed, and will they meet the intent of this section? Or
okay, so I mean, I feel like we're there now. I mean, maybe it's just maybe in my head, but what are others feeling about where we are? That if we go leave it as it is and make the site-specific opportunity available. Jen?
I think we've got to allow the planning professionals to plan and not be overwhelmed with lots of these variabilities that Sean is fearful of. I think where we can make up for our concerns is in our public-facing communications to the broader world, where the spirit of what we want Algonquin Highlands to be can be really clearly fleshed out. And then we're making provisions for certain adaptations to happen that people will know they are welcome to apply for. I do think that with the balance of our communications piece, I'm more comfortable with what Sean is suggesting than if we didn't have all of these communications opportunities in our laps right now.
Fair enough. Lisa Berry, you had your hand up.
Yep. In the same section that we're talking about, in the third bullet, it's saying such home occupation shall not include a medical clinic, a private hospital, a nursing home, a boarding house, an eating establishment, or a vet clinic, but may include a business or professional office that complies with the provisions of this subsection. Does that point sort of cover that off? When it's saying provision of this subsection, is it talking about specifically the subsection mentioned within that bullet, or the subsection of home occupation?
Sean? Medical clinic is struck out, Lisa.
Okay, so can I?
Well,
okay.
I'll let Sean clarify for you, because he's the planner guy.
it is referring to 4.19, that subsection,
Okay.
the entirety.
Okay, then my second question is how, if we've sort of struck that out and we're moving forward, moving forward to table 1A on permitted residential and accessory uses. One of the areas within accessory uses is business, professional, or administrative offices. And in this, there are no X's in any of the shoreline or rural residentials. I just wonder how would that change?
Well, there would have to be an application. It would be site specific.
So even if,
So-
okay, even I guess where I'm trying to figure that out is how business or professional office wouldn't fit into home occupation.
Sean?
Further down in that table, it does identify home occupation and home industry as being permitted within certain zones.
Okay. To me, it looks like it's there and it's not there. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. But it covers off, Rick.
Yeah, in that regard, some of these, the permitted uses, for instance, as the accessory, the business and professional office, accessory to a non-residential use only, that was to cover off some of the uses that were related to, as a traditionally a more traditional or principal use. But it applies to some of the accessory uses in commercial zones as opposed to in the residential. In the residential zones, it's already covered under the home occupation definition. I think that's why it was separate.
Angie.
I just want to go back to 4.19, just to clarify. So the bullet about such home occupation shall not include, we're adding a medical clinic back in. That's correct, right?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, because we're excluding
Because then if it's prohibited pending a site-specific zoning amendment application, so it has to go back in. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that's all.
So we're adding it in, but it's not permitted.
Right.
Right. That is correct. What else do we want to talk about home occupation? I think we've run the gamut. Is everybody satisfied with where we've landed? And it's been, as I say, it's been a very long and at times confusing conversation, but I think everyone's on the same page now. Would council agree? Looking for nodding heads. So can we leave it with the planning professionals then to take care of it from here? Liz.
So we seem to have landed with home occupation. Are we good to go with home industry?
Yeah, I'm not aware that there's any challenge with home industry. Home industry is the sort of the mechanical stuff, carpentry, welding, electrical, noisy, noxious stuff. And I'm fine with it the way it is. Unless someone's gonna throw a wrench in the works, no pun intended. Are other members of council satisfied with the differentiation and the parameters of home industry? I'm gonna take that as a yes. Okay, so Sean, do you feel that you have enough from this robust and detailed conversation?
Yes, so my understanding is that we will include a medical facility as being prohibited in the home occupation, with the understanding that it can be applied for through a site-specific amendment.
So forgive me for asking this one last question. I'm just not absolutely clear on where we landed with a home occupation occupying an accessory building.
Yeah, so as Sean just said, that's a carry forward from the previous meeting's discussion, and home occupations are being allowed in an accessory building.
Okay.
Because that's where most of them are now anyway.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind too, that it still has to comply with other aspects of it, that it's
Right.
one person and you can't have a bunch of staff and that kind of thing. Okay, so are we done with, can I put a line through home occupation? So what could perhaps be equally as robust a conversation, we're gonna talk about boathouses. So Sean, take us through that, because council did request some more information.
Yeah, so in the report, I did outline how many permits we've received since 2007, which is a total of 87 permits for boathouses or boat ports. A majority of these were dry land structures. We have also reached out to the other townships and sought clarification on why they do not allow in-water boathouse or boat port structures. So those are outlined in the report. Now, perhaps the more important point I raised in my report here is that our official plan currently mirrors the policies of our zoning bylaw amendments as far as where they are allowed to be in the water and where they cannot be permitted in the water. So if council wanted to change the zoning bylaw from what it is currently, as far as in-water structures are concerned, we would need to pause this zoning bylaw amendment process and then amend our official plan first, because we cannot pass a zoning bylaw that is not in compliance with our official plan document. So that would present some significant delays as far as the zoning bylaw update is concerned. So my recommendation at this point would be to leave the policy or the provision as it is currently, and then that be reviewed at our either next scheduled official plan update, or should council wish to review that official plan sooner, we would undertake that process then, and then update the zoning bylaw section that deals with boathouse and boat port structures.
Yeah, interested to know council's thoughts on this. I know that Councillor Bayou has been a proponent of equity, and we have the only place in Halliburton County where you can have an in-water boathouse is Coagama Lake, and the only reason Dysart allows it is on Coagama Lake because Algonquin Highlands does, or not Coagama, in the north. And I know, Jen, you'd said in the beginning that in terms of your desire for equity, that you weren't too concerned which way it went. Like you could go either way, whether it's a elimination of the exemption in the north, in the townships of Sherburne, Livingston, and McClintock, or the other option is to allow them in the south. I mean, I'll be the first to put it on the table. If we are going to pursue a desire for equity, my preference would be to eliminate the exemption in the north and may have no in-water boathouses at all. That's my personal preference. Deputy Mayor Liz Danielson.
That would be my personal preference too. I believe that there should be equity across the board. I also believe that in-water boathouses are contrary to the direction we're trying to take with the shoreline preservation. And I just have a problem with allowing something in one part of the municipality and not in the other. I would have to agree that I think that we should not allow in-water boathouses anymore. I'm really disappointed to hear that we would have to stop this process and go back to the OP in order to resolve this issue. But part of me is not willing to say, oh, let's leave it the way it is until we do our next OP review, because that's years from now. Is it not, Sean?
Yeah, Sean, when is the next OP review required?
Sorry, I just have to grab, I believe it's 2023.
And admittedly, I mean, if we wait for the scheduled OP and people know that this is the direction that council may be going, there could be a number of panic projects to get something that could be taken away. And despite the disruption in the zoning bylaw review process by having to visit the OP, I would be contrary to the planner's recommendation, I would be willing to undertake that process myself. Angie and then Jen.
I believe, Sean, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but if council wanted to move forward with it sooner than the full review, council could do an amendment next year or immediately following this process. Do an amendment to the OP and then change the zoning bylaw again. Am I correct on that, Sean or Rick? One of you?
Rick, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, if I may, yes. I think the short answer is you can entertain a zoning or an official plan amendment anytime that you choose to. And I think to follow up on Sean's comments as well, if council feels that this is an item that they want to deal with, the official plan amendment could run concurrently with the zoning bylaw process at the same time, so that public meeting for the formal public meeting for the zoning bylaw, you would also have the public meeting for the change to the official plan that would deal with the in-water boathouses. It complicates things a little bit. It would be easier. I frankly, I agree with Sean's recommendation to say maybe let sleeping dogs lie right now, and you bring it on as a separate project right after if you want. But if you do have the appetite to move forward with it at this point as part of the zoning process, we can dovetail the official plan amendment portion with it. The difference is that the zoning bylaw wouldn't necessarily come into effect until the county approves the official plan amendment. That's part of the criteria. So, and theoretically, you could separate the two and do two separate bylaw amendments as well. So there are a lot of ways of accomplishing that if you want, that won't hold up the balance of the zoning process. But again, short answer is I agree with Sean's assessment on it. But if council want to proceed, we can find ways to run them together.
Sorry, was I going to Jen next? I see Julie's got her hand up. Jen, were you next?
Yes, can you hear me? Because my internet's in and out a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. There is an equity issue. It's not a screaming equity issue. For me, it is something that if we can address it, that would be great. But it's not something, people's rights aren't being necessarily infringed here that requires a remedial address. So, my question goes back to boat ports, the kind of boat ports where there's nothing in the water, it's affixed to the dock, to a crib dock. For people who want to protect their private property, boats sometimes worth hundreds of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars at least, could we not permit a boat port, which does not have the environmental impact that a boat house would have, which is built into the water? Would it just not be easier? And is that something that could be accomplished without having to go back to the OP?
Yeah, I think that's separate. That's an addition. That's not. Although, yeah, both ports are allowed in the north as well, are they not?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not aware of too much difference in the construction of a boat port versus a boathouse. There's still a structural need to support that roof structure. Basically, the main difference would be there's walls constructed around it, so it's more of a visual impact issue or a flooding issue. So, for example, on rivers, boat ports are preferred over boathouses. So during floods, the water can flow through those structures. Yeah.
And I have to tell you that around this issue, this is the one that I would let sleeping dogs lie. Like I could be speaking from bias, so I'm willing to say it out loud that I do not and will not support in-water boathouses or boat ports where they are currently not allowed. They're a visual problem, and we work very hard with clear skies and maintaining vistas and what's it called in the OP, Sean? We're trying to make sure that when you look out, you see, what's it called?
The waterfront character of the area.
Yeah, and if there's something that I hear a lot about, or I get a number of questions about, is, can my neighbor build that? It obstructs my view. And if we're trying viewscapes, So if we're trying to maintain and retain viewscapes, adding boat ports is not it for me. It's absolutely not it. And that's not what I'm hearing from people who want them, of course, they want them. But lots of people don't. And that's where when it comes to a public weigh in on this, fast and furious, it'll be an interesting day. I'm gonna go to Liz and then back to Jen.
We've had a couple of specific applications at the Committee of Adjustment for boat ports. And I have, as a result of that, seen some very substantial structures going out into the water, and walls or no walls, they're substantial, they're in the water. I see them as just as problematic as boat houses. I truly do. And Julie's had her hand up for quite a while.
Yeah, I apologize. Thank you, Liz. Julie, sorry, Jen, I'm going to backtrack on you because Julie did have her hand up and I missed you. I'm sorry.
My question was just for Sean, because so in 14 years, we've had 80, maybe one a year for an actual boathouse. Is that what you're implying on that?
We didn't have the specific numbers to break out exactly how many of those were in water, but they are very few.
So there's not, in 14 years, we've had not very many. Okay, that was my question. So it's not a major.
Yeah, and you have to remember too that part of it, and I recall from having sat through an OP review in this regard when I was a counselor, the room was filled and there was one meeting, hundreds of people, they weren't physically here, but supported, and hundreds of people came the next time and said, you got to be crazy, you have to let us continue to have those. What's interesting is people want the right to have them, but they don't necessarily build them. So that's why Julie's question is important, because there aren't a lot of requests, but people get very upset when they think something is being taken from them, even if they're not using it. It's that perception of something being taken. So do you have a follow-up, Julie? And then I'm gonna go to Jen and then back to Liz.
It was just another small question for Sean. So when you're talking about specifically Quagma Lake and having two marinas, does that affect their docking and their storage if we said no boat ports?
They wouldn't be allowed to construct any new in-water structures if we were to prohibit them in water.
Okay.
They'd still build on land.
Right. No, I'm just in water. Okay.
But that doesn't include docks. That's not
No
docking facilities. That's
no.
Yeah.
I'm talking docking, covered docking facilities.
right. Okay, Jen, and then back to Liz.
Of all the hills to die on, this is not mine. I'm happy to let things just lie the way they are. I don't think we are necessarily best served by going into this hours and hours and hours. Happy to just pull back.
Liz.
Whether we agreed to allow them or not, there's still something intrinsically wrong with saying you, Julie, you can build a lovely boathouse, and Lisa, you cannot. You both live in the same municipality, and yet there's a different rule for each of you, and that, to me, that's just wrong. I don't know how often that happens in municipalities. That I guess there are site-specific regulations, but it just seems to me that for something that has such an impact on our waters and the health of our waters, that we would say you can and you can't.
So two things. Given that to pursue this, notwithstanding what Rick has said, that we would need to get involved in modifying the OP either at the same time or first. Is that something that you feel strongly enough about to undertake? Or do you feel strongly enough about the inequity that you want to either suspend the zoning bylaw review to do the OP amendment, or to run them concurrently, as Rick said they could find a way to do?
I would hate to see us suspend the process that we're doing right now, because we're late. And for that reason, I would hate to see us suspend the review of the zoning bylaw, but Rick is suggesting that there's a way to do them concurrently. And you may not as a group agree with me. That's just, if there's a way to do it without delay and without a great deal of gnashing of teeth, then I think we should. I mean, it may be that when it goes to public review, the public is so incensed by the idea of us saying no, that, we'll have to go with that.
And so that was going to be my next question this is a democratic process. And so I would then ask the remaining members of council, so Liz has said that she would like to see but you're looking at the removal of the in-water opportunity in the north, Liz, is that? Yes. Yes. And to do that, we would have to undertake the zoning bylaw review and the OP amendment concurrently is an option. It's just a little bit more work. I'm putting words in the mouth of the planners. I would ask Julie and Lisa their thoughts on that. That she doesn't feel right now it's a hill to die on, and it can always be revisited in in 3 years' time. So I'd look to you two to be the arbiters of this. Julie?
I'm in the same boat as Jen. There just hasn't been enough applications to justify all that extra right now.
Lisa?
Yeah, I support the idea in principle. However, I'm still would like to see a final result of the shoreline conservation. I do feel there's an impact there.
Well, so to your point, there were in the 222-page document that has since been updated from the shoreline bylaw survey process. There was interest from the public in there being less shoreline disruption, not more, which is also to Liz's point. If the official plan review is in 3 years' time, that would, Lisa, allow the shoreline bylaw, which is still in its infancy, to get sorted out and in place. And there could be a better match for this discussion after that bylaw is in place. But we do know, and Liz said this at the outset, we do know that the shoreline bylaw input thus far is for less disruption, not more. So there's a number of factors at play. It can go either way, but I'm not hearing, I think, Liz, you might be the cheese that stands alone on this. I'm not hearing overwhelming support to tackle them both at the moment. But I think it's important for staff to keep in mind that the in-water inequity would need to be addressed absolutely in light of the shoreline bylaw outcome and at the next OP review is kind of what I'm hearing. I see one nodding head. I see two nodding heads. I feel like an auctioneer, 3 nodding heads. Liz, go ahead.
I just have this vision in my head that I can't get rid of that having gone and done a property inspection on a place where there was a narrow bay and there were some water depth issues, and there were more structures in the water than there was water, honestly. And that's, I can't get that vision out of my head when we talk about this. But I hear what everybody's saying. I accept that I'm the lone person standing on a hill. That's fine.
And I have to say that if the inequity is to be addressed, I absolutely support the elimination of the in-water opportunity in the north as opposed to allowing it in the south. I'm just not sure that now's the time to do it. But then you could say, when is the time to do it? But anyway, I think we've landed where we have. Everybody's had their say, so I'm going to draw a line through that one. So if we can just have regard for keeping an eye on the shoreline bylaw, Sean and Angie, and then when the next OP review comes up, this should probably be one of the top things to talk about. Right, boathouses, boat course. Line, turn the page. Bees. Bees are fun. I didn't know there was a Bee Act. And I love the answers that the Bee Act provided. So Sean, take it away.
Yes, this was a fun project to do some research on. So yes, there is in fact a Bees Act in effect, and they do set out sort of the threshold of when there's a commercial operation versus a non-commercial operation, that being when you have more or less than 50 colonies on a property. It also does set out some setback information from property lines for hives or colonies, as well as from highways. So should council want to include backyard beekeeping as a permitted use, I would suggest we mirror the setback requirements in the Bees Act to remain consistent, as well as we could adopt some of the policies found in the backyard hen section, specifically related to minimum lot size, where these sorts of operations could take place. So just looking for comments from council on that.
Thoughts from council on that? On the bees, it's fun to say bees. Liz?
I just want to point out to your worship that our planner has used the words planning and fun in the same sentence.
Yes, he'll be reprimanded for that.
I was one of the people who voiced some concerns about the proximity of bees in necessarily in residential areas. This Bee Act information kind of resolved it for me. I'd be happy to go with the parameters that have been laid out here.
Yeah, I think that with the 30 meter setback, basically, really small properties wouldn't. Now, is that 30 meters? That's from each. So in theory, there are some properties where someone might want to have them where they simply can't, they don't have the space for them. What do we think our obligations might be? We would hear about this in the public process, but you know, if somebody is allergic to bees, would we have any legal or moral obligation to consider a neighbor with allergies? So, or is that the purpose of the Bee Act that's considered all of that? I wouldn't want to set us up for
that I do not have an answer for. We may have to seek legal clarification on that, whether there is any liability associated with that. I suspect not, but to know for sure, we should consult with legal counsel on that.
We might do that, pending council's thoughts on that. And I wonder too, just because you have, you know, a property with less than 50 colonies is considered non-commercial and must renew their certificate of registration every 3 years. We need to put a limit, just like chickens. So that's what you're suggesting about having the same parameters, because somebody who's really interested in beekeeping might say, great, I can have 49 colonies. And there's more risk to neighbors or persons who might be susceptible or allergic at 49 colonies than 4. So I hope that council would be considering a limit on colonies on certain lands. Like, you know, if you have 60 acres, it doesn't matter how many. I mean, I could have 49 on 60 acres, but you couldn't have 49 on 2 acres, I don't think. Would that make sense, Jen?
Yeah, you know, each colony has a tremendous number of bees. 49 or 50 colonies it's a shockingly high threshold for non-commercial. I would see, as you were saying, Madam Mayor, maybe 4 as an upper limit for Algonquin Highlands. Yeah.
I mean, we have to remember the purpose of this is sustainability, and you know, we have a tremendous amount of food inequity, and when we did our OP, the Environment and Stewardship Committee, along with other organizations in the community, did provide input, and that's how we've gotten here. Is trying to be as generous as we can.
Papers here. In regards to backyard beekeeping, on my screen here, I have Sean's note just on council has requested further discussion, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, Sean. But where within the draft is this living? I don't seem to see it anywhere. Or is this just a discussion that has come through the?
No, it's apiary. It's under hobby farm, wasn't it? Sean, go ahead.
So backyard beekeeping was something brought up at our last meeting, so it was not contained in the draft document.
Yeah, it does under farm, any farming or agricultural use and includes apiaries, aviaries, barrier bush crops, et cetera, et cetera.
So that's for a farm, so
Oh, this is a backyard, yes, yes, yes,
Yes.
my apologies, yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
Jen's hand?
It was up, just to make that same clarification, apiary on a farm versus backyard. So Sean, could you just take us through then, would this be applicable to, I should have my form in front of me, but I guess it wouldn't be there, but would it be SR1, SR2? Where would you be suggesting that this be possible and or not possible?
My recommendation would be that it would mirror the backyard hens. So wherever backyard hens are permitted, backyard beekeeping would be permitted. Similar provisions for both as far as lot size requirements. So I'll just have to double check exactly where the backyard hens would be permitted. I don't believe they were going to be permitted in the shoreline residential zones.
No, I don't think they were. Do you think that I sort of expected that one of the reasons why hens were not recommended for SR1 or 2 was the waste, which doesn't really occur with bees. I don't know if if it would be advisable to have a direct mirroring or a partial mirroring because of the nature of the different uses.
Well, interestingly enough, or coincidentally, I don't have any concrete sources, but I do recall coming across an article in my research where there was a concern with waste produced by bees in residential areas. So that could in fact be an issue. I'm not a professional on the matter at all, but just in my very preliminary research, it looked like there could be some conflict there. So I would be reluctant to, at least at first, to include them in the shoreline residential zones. Perhaps in the future that could be something to consider, but would certainly defer to council on that.
Lisa?
I think that the lot size and the restrictions on where they can be is the guiding principle, opposed to the classification of where. Like if you have a shoreline residential property and you have 200 acres, but you have a rural residential lot that has half an acre, to me, it would be the size of lot versus the type of lot that would be the guiding principle.
Sean?
We certainly can permit them in all residential zones based on lot size, if that's council direction. I'm not familiar enough with the topic to say for sure that it should not be permitted in a shoreline residential zone. But in my preliminary research, I would suggest it not be at this time. But that we can certainly discuss.
Well, and I think I rather suspect, and I hope to be wrong, that we might hear quite a bit about this. There's people who, lots of folks are afraid of bees or have allergies, and they would be looking for assurances, similarly to Lisa's point, that we're considering almost again site specific as opposed to just a bit of a carte blanche zone. I just think of, let's say, 60 acres. Have all the bees you want, but if you're on a little lot in downtown Dorset, maybe you shouldn't have bees because the neighbors are so close. So it might be better to do it, as Lisa says, about size as opposed to just zone. Jen and then Liz.
And with tremendous apologies for this, would backyard hens not also fit that same criteria? If you've got 600 acres or you've got 200 acres and you're SR1, I can't recall why we did not wish to have backyard hens.
Yeah. Sean, or Rick, can you think of, jump in and answer that offhand?
So for those larger lots, they would be more of a traditional farm operation. Where in the rare circumstances where you do have a 200-acre lot, and if somehow it is zoned entirely shoreline residential, that would be perhaps an appropriate site-specific amendment that we could entertain. But I would be reluctant to include backyard hens as being a permitted use on all shoreline residential lots.
So that only means we would have different rules for bees than hens. I mean, you're not gonna get pecked to death by hens, but you could. What? You could, I suppose, but you could suffer injury or illness from bees. So, Jen?
And yet probably not. I think this is where there's a bit of a public education. Maybe we're not responsible for that public education, but I do think there are quite a number of myths out there about the type of bees that are generally sold in Ontario as hives destined to create honey for folks. Those are really not aggressive species. There are other more aggressive species, but very hard to acquire in Ontario for commercial use.
Yeah, exactly. We were not talking about having 49 hives of yellow jackets, for example. Yeah. Okay, well, so notwithstanding, what we can do is our job is to put things in and then it goes out for public consultation. So I'm sure there are those who, if they have concerns, will let us know what they might be, and perhaps Sean could have a little poke around things. But at the risk of belaboring the bee conversation, if we have similar provisions to the hens for now, then that at least gets the conversation or continues the conversation moving, that we've agreed that we're allowing them with certain provisions, and let that go out to consultation. Jen?
With apologies to Mr. O'Callaghan, because I know you've told us this before, but Sean, could you just
This is for you.
Sean, would you mind just going through one more time why a blanket prohibition for SR1, for example, is better than a blanket provision on lot sizes under 2 acres or an acre or 10 acres for either of these species? Because it does strike me that if you want 3 hens behind your house, far away, on the far side from the water, or if you want a single colony of bees, far side of the water, and you've got 2.5 acres, the likelihood of it creating harm is minimal. And I guess I'm still kind of stuck on that one a little bit.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly a fair question. I mean, generally, I guess the concern would be more from an environmental side of things and keeping these sorts of operations as far away as possible from a water body. So I believe that's the primary reason for not allowing these in the waterfront or shoreline residential zones. I think it's, if you do meet a certain size threshold, then those would be better addressed through a zoning bylaw amendment, would be my recommendation. But that's certainly something we can change, should council want to.
Maybe we should call Ron Lofthouse, the local beekeeper, and ask him. Maybe I shouldn't have just said his name out loud in the public meeting, but when we have local beekeepers, it's one thing for us to read the Bee Act, the Bees Act, versus talking to people who are actually living this life on the ground. So there's maybe some consultation that those folks can provide when we get to the public part, is to ask them to weigh in and provide some direction. Because we're putting together a document that's going out to the public. We could hear all kinds of things about all the decisions we've made to date, and we have to allow for some of that opportunity for input. So is that, what would you guys like to do around that? Because you're both kind of saying the same thing. Do you want it changed that it's based on lot size, or do you want to do with the blanket SR1 that Sean's recommending for now, and then, and let the public help us sort that out? What would you like to do around that? I guess that question is to Jen and Lisa. Lisa?
Are we talking, just before I answer that question, are we talking about two different lot sizes for two different things, or having the chicken discussion and the bees in the same discussion? Because I think.
Well, we've already made the decision on chickens. We're not going back on chickens. I think the idea is that similarly to chickens, that there would be provisions for bees. And Sean is suggesting that I think he's suggesting like there'd be a blanket prohibition in the SR1. But to the point that both you and Jen have raised is that you could have a larger waterfront lot where it wouldn't matter. So I guess that's what I'm looking for is, do you want to hammer that out now, or do you want to leave it for public input, maybe learn more and circle back?
I support that.
Okay, so Sean, we'll leave it as is, and then we'll just make sure that that we remember that we're looking for some bee input. Is that all right with council? Sean?
Yes, so we will do some formulating of the provisions so that they would only be allowed in the hamlet residential and rural residential zone to mirror the backyard hens. Now also, I heard a limit of 4 colonies. Is that correct? Am I understanding that we would limit it to a total of 4 colonies for backyard beekeeping?
Except if you have 100 acres.
So that would be more of a farm operation and
right.
Not backyard beekeeping.
Backyard beekeeping. Liz and then Jen.
I'm just wondering where the 4 came from. It just seemed like it was sort of picked out of the sky. It sounds like a great number, but based on what?
Yeah, I think that was just a suggestion that Jen made, and because I had said 49, like less than 50 is not commercial, so 49 is a heck of a lot of bees, and I think Jen had just said 4 sounds more reasonable, but it could be 6, could be 2, could be 10. I don't know. I don't know anything about bees. Jen.
Yeah, totally out of the sky, and probably best to ignore that because I don't have information on that. Maybe that's something, I don't know. What should we do? What should we do?
I don't know. I mean, we can leave it. We can stick a number on it. Just say 5, because the whole point of this is we set the groundwork. Public weighs in, and we can change our minds on it or not on any number of things. So if through further just to get this moving. If through further consultation with any of our local beekeepers who may be hearing of this conversation might offer some perspective. When we next look at this through the public process, we could say it makes sense to have 2 or 10, but pick a number, because none of us know anything about bees. So it's probably not best for us to make those decisions. Jen?
For me, the important thing is that it's on the table. It hasn't been on the table in the past, so there was nothing for the public to comment on or for us to discuss, and now it is on the table, so that's amazing. So I agree, let's go through the public consultation and then we can refine with better information.
Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Excellent, good. So that brings us to the end of the information from Sean's report. It is 10 to 12. I thought we'd be done and dusted for noon. I am at the office and did not bring lunch and have a puppy at home. So if we are going to break for lunch, it's going to have to be a little bit longer than 20 minutes because I would need to away. So the plan that I have is to pick up in the chart at Hunt Camp on page 13. There aren't very many pieces left, but there's a couple of conversations to be held there. We can push through a little bit to see how far we get, but if we are going to break for lunch, as I say, it won't be, for me, it can't be 20 minutes. So what would you like to do, Liz? I see your hand in there.
Let's break for lunch and reconvene at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, we have to acknowledge that we sometimes get a bit punchy after lunch, so we need to make sure we have a brisk walk. Those blood cells flowing. But if you want to do that, it's 10 to. If that's supported by the members of council, then we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. That'll give us a little bit of time too. It's been a heavy morning. It's been a really heavy morning, so maybe a little bit of fresh air and a break will probably do as well. So we will reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you for the suggestion, and we will reconvene on page 13 at the item revised 4.21 hunt camp in the chart. We'll see you at 1. Welcome back. We are reconvened. We are starting the continuation of our conversation in the chart. The chart of proposed revisions on page 13, item 4.21 hunt camp. So Sean, if you take us away. I think the only thing, sorry, I just interject there. It said it identifies a new clause 3, but it doesn't address square footage. It addresses setback unless that was changed.
So the only change made here is we removed the maximum size of a hunt camp, and it will just rely on lot coverage.
Yeah, which we had talked about before.
Correct.
Okay, everybody okay with that, staying with that previous discussion? Right, next is noxious uses, and this is one of the items that I had noted down that a member of council had said at our last discussion that they wanted to talk about, and I think there's some concern about having it say something somewhere. If anybody can nod if that's what you were thinking. I don't know who it was. So noxious uses, Sean, talk to us a little bit about that and what you think we might be able to do so that we can have something in there about it.
Yeah, this is a historical section in the bylaw. I think there were some discussions on whether or not it's actually required because it is rather open-ended and open to interpretation. So it's as far as I know, it's not required to be in there, but it's also not really doing any harm by remaining in place. So we would just seek council direction on that, how they wish to proceed.
So a bit of a no harm, no foul. The CAO reminded me that noxious uses was put in here some time ago as regards, and I remember this, the dreaded portable asphalt plant that raised the ire of many. And so it's possible and easy enough to leave in there just for the future in case it ever is needed. It's there. It's just sort of laying there dormant. So instead of taking it out, we can leave it, and I think that might satisfy. It could be a bit of a motherhood statement, but I think from what we talked about before, council felt they would feel better if it was left in there as a commitment toward environmental concerns. Would that be an accurate assessment of council thoughts? Not seeing any hands, but I see Rick's hand. Go ahead, Rick. You're on mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind council, this was taken out following the discussion. It was actually the wording of the section that used to be 4.25 on page 40. It said the use is declared by the council of the township to be a noxious trade, business, or manufacture. And I think that was where the original concern was. And that's where the discussion went through with taking it out completely. Again, similar to what Sean has said, I have no issue with it staying in. It's a fairly standard provision in a lot of zoning bylaws. It doesn't hurt to have it, and again, it doesn't. It may be something you might be able to use at some point in the future.
I did see a hand. Liz, was it yours?
Yeah, it was. I really didn't want to take it out completely. I know that it's a pretty it could be pretty broad. and cover an awful lot of things, but, you know, I think that there's a number of things that we might consider noxious that could occur that we might want to deal with. I just hate to take it out completely.
Yeah, so fair enough. There's no damage being done, as I say, no harm, no foul, so we can leave it in there and that satisfy council's concerns around that. Lisa?
In there, should it be also added to the, like the glossary? Sorry, no, that's,
Sorry, can you speak up? Added to,
sorry, it's not in the definition. So then would it then be put in back, would it be put into the definitions as well?
planner folk?
Yes, it's actually, it was proposed to be taken out in the definition as well as in this particular section, so they'll both go back in.
Thank you.
It was under after non-conforming was the word noxious, and then that is supposed to be taken out. But it'll be
Okay,
added back in now.
so that's good. So noxious uses back in for potential future uses and whatnot. Then next is planting strip. I think that we're okay with that. There was nothing there. Sean, Jen?
Yes, I'm just scrolling through the most recent version. I see in the notes we were going to add reference to native species, but in the text itself, I see an addition of evergreen, but I don't see the native word.
I don't know if any changes were made. I mean, I'm still using the document from our last meeting, so if we had decided to add in natives, it might not be in yet. Would that be true, Sean?
Yes, native species will be added to the document in the final draft. Evergreen will also remain in place.
Okay. I thought that, all right, no, that's okay. I thought we were going to see it in the last draft, but I didn't. So that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, there hasn't been a new draft created since our last discussion. So, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just I'm just referring to the chart that we got for our last discussion. So I might be a little bit behind, but again, I thought that we'd had that conversation and that at our last discussion, we had decided to put in native species. Anyway, so long as it's going to be in there, that's great. I just was concerned it was not there.
So the chart that I'm looking at says reference to native species to be added to the criteria.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there we go. So that's good. Again, shoreline buffer, we talked a little bit about this. We need to sort of wait and see what language comes out of the shoreline, the county shoreline proposal. Next up is trailer or mobile home parks. And there was an addition, but this somebody had asked that this be pulled out. It was one of the things that somebody said they wanted to talk about. Who was that, and what would you like to say about that? Lisa?
I believe it was me. I just wanted a greater understanding of if there's a temporary use, and in regards to, there's a big difference between a trailer on a property versus a trailer park or mobile home. And I have a hard time not understanding how a garden suite couldn't be, how a trailer couldn't be considered a garden suite if it's a movable item.
So yeah, I mean, I'll go to the planner folks for this. We had talked quite extensively about garden suites, and I think the idea about garden suites is they have to be removable, but they're not necessarily on wheels. So Sean, can you take us through that again?
Yes, so they do have to be a structure, and a trailer is not considered a structure that's regulated under the Ontario Building Code. So as far as I'm aware, it would not meet the requirements to be considered a garden suite.
Does that answer your question? And if you remember, we also had quite an extensive conversation around why is garden suites still in there? Because the additional changes through the More Houses, More Choices Act allowed for second dwellings and carriage houses and et cetera. So we had quite an extensive conversation about, well, why on earth, no one would ever choose a garden suite because you have to take it away. But because it exists in legislation at the provincial level, we have to have it in there. And we had, as a group, concluded that it was highly unlikely that, given the choice, anybody would choose a garden suite because of its fussy nature. So it's almost a bit of a, it's almost like a moot point. Does that answer your question, Lisa, or did you look for different, are you looking for different clarification there?
No, that answers my question. I also wanted to know just what in the red, it says the use of a trailer on recreational mobile home is not permitted in any residential or rural zone, except in accordance with section 4.7, construction use is temporary. And then it says RH July 8th. And then in yellow, it says check. What does that mean?
Well, that would be Rick's annotation.
Sorry, I've got my hands going in too many different directions at once. Yes, I was going back. The check, I think, was more of a notation. Let me just see. Sorry, I jumped ahead to the truck bus. I think the reference to check was to whether I had put the right section, if it was 4.7 construction uses temporary, or if I had the wrong number. So it was actually a note to myself that I think I should probably have taken it.
So it's been corrected, right?
Yes, yes.
So cross out the word check, highlighted in yellow.
That's right. Yes. Yes, please.
Lisa, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
So currently, if I owned a vacant piece of land as a recreational property, I would not be allowed to bring a trailer on for any period of time?
You can't live in a trailer. Sean, do you want to go into that in a little more detail?
Yes, that is correct. The only time you can use a trailer on a residential property is as a temporary use while you are actively constructing on the property.
And is that our rule or is that provincial direction?
That is contained in our zoning bylaw. It's fairly standard provision in most zoning bylaws.
Yeah.
I believe I understand why Lisa's asking these questions, and I've thought about this too. There are so many families out there that might be able to afford a little plot of land, but it's going to be another 10 years before they have enough money to start building on that land, especially if the bylaw regulations state that you have to build a permanent type of structure. You can't build to a lesser standard in that particular zone where you've bought the property. So if you've bought this property, but you can't afford to build there yet, but you've got the dream to do so, and you want to spend a weekend on your property, it's unfortunate that we can't allow someone to bring up a trailer for a few days to enjoy their property in the way that they can until they can construct later on in the future. Especially when, and I know this is not the jurisdiction of the township, but if they look across the road, the county road, and there's a piece of crown land, and there are 5 trailers on the crown land who have all the right in the world to use public space to have their trailer for a few days. But on my land, which I own outright, I don't have the right to put my trailer up there for a few days. There's, it doesn't sit easily.
Sean, did you have a planning perspective on that?
The challenge is these lots are designed and created to support residential development with dwellings and maintain a character of an area. Trailers are permitted in campgrounds or crown land, things where you would expect to see a camping use taking place. They're not associated with a residential use like a dwelling would be. So there are some significant concerns with permitting trailers on residential properties outside of these designated camping areas that we do have within the township.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges is and there are those who would debate this, but recreational trailers are not a housing solution. They are not monitored or enforced. There's no attachment to the building code with them. There are concerns with, you know, fire safety and sewage disposal and drinking water. And I think I understand what you're saying, Jen, for a couple of days here and there, but that's not what happens. What happens is people leave their trailer and then they put tiki lights around the awning, and then they put down patio stones, and then it becomes where they hang out. And that's what's not permitted. And I think the big part of that is we have no ability to differentiate between somebody who's, you know, spending time on their land because they intend to build when they, you know, understandably get some money together. Meantime, and I just learned this recently, that trailers, they are not accessible by MPAC for taxation purposes. So somebody could, in theory, spend time on their essentially vacant, technically vacant lot. And there's no enjoyment of taxation for the township to continue to grow and develop. And I mean, if we could, again, I said at the beginning, unfortunately, we often have to make decisions for the transgressors, for the bad apples, and then the good folks who only want to pull a trailer around a few days here and there suffer the consequences. We don't have the ability to enforce. I'm going to go to Julie first and then back to Liz.
And just as a temporary living situation, trailers aren't built for 4-season use. They're not built to be used here in the winter. They don't survive that. You can't live in them. They're not insulated properly. They're single pane windows, so on and so forth. So they're not built to live in the winter. So they're really not a sustainable housing solution, even temporary.
Liz, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't condone the use of trailers on a residential or rural zone lots, but what I do wonder about is that, you know, there's an awful lot of developed residential properties that have a trailer stored on them, and they're, yeah, I mean, they're used for travel and for holidays, and I think that quite often what will happen is that you'll see them used periodically during the summer for visiting guests, and you know, I don't really have a problem with that, but I mean, where's the line? How do we differentiate there on the use?
Yeah, that's the challenge, and that's what I meant by, you know, enforcement. And enforcement is something that keeps coming up and up, and I said recently that I have every hope that when we have our projects and priorities discussion later this year for setting budget, that somewhere in there is some money to hire a bylaw person whose job is to go out and keep an eye on these things. And I think we would be well advised, in my opinion, to invest in better enforcement of a number of things we already have in place that we struggle with, than to go the other way and open up what, again, would be a giant can of worms, in my opinion. Lisa?
Is there any restriction on camping on your own property?
Sean?
So yes, the bylaw does restrict the use of camping and trailers to your properties that are zoned for a campground. So camping establishments.
Yeah, so the people, to Liz's point, the folks, they're all over. We see them all the time. We drive by them every day. There are people who have trailers on their properties that they're not supposed to be using. We don't have the resources to go and knock on doors and say, stop using it. And that's what we need to change, as opposed to going, I believe, instead of going the other way. You know, the initial question was asked, if I have a piece of vacant land and I put my trailer on it. Well, if you have a piece of vacant land, it doesn't have a 911 number. So now we have emergency service provision challenges. So we need to have regard for the safety and security of people who are part of our community as well. So to me, that's one more very important issue. Lisa?
Sorry, I just clarification, Sean, you're saying you can't have a trailer on that, or you can't have a campground, but you can't put up a tent on your property?
That is correct. The zoning bylaw does not permit camping on a residential lot. It's restricted to where a campground would be permitted.
And so this is where, I see Liz is chuckling and has her hand up, probably gonna say the same thing. This is where we have to remember that there are, not unlike the home occupation conversation, there are lots of violations occurring around us all the time. To me, the answer is do a better job of enforcing it than to say, well, it's happening, let's just let it happen. Because there are other things connected to it that could provide unsafe conditions or other challenges. Liz?
Conversely, there's an awful lot of people who, say that you bring your grandkids up for a couple of weeks, and you want them to have that experience of sleeping. So many people will set up a tent in their backyard for their kids to sleep in. And I mean, I would hate to see the bylaw officer show up in that case. And yet, on the other hand, I wouldn't want somebody to set up a sort of like a larger tent structure and have somebody living in it for a long period of time. I mean, you can see an awful lot of tents right now, and I don't think they're being used for habitation so much as kids enjoyment.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the challenge with zoning and enforcement is that we know and have to acknowledge, and everybody does across any municipality, that yeah, somebody pitches a tent for the grandkids, or because they've got, cousin Mildred and the kids coming for a weekend. I mean, if somebody complains, that's one thing, but I don't know that anybody does. What we do get complaints about is trailers on land, and then 2 trailers, and then 6 trailers. Lizzie, you mentioned an example down in another jurisdiction that you saw quite recently where you had driven by and thought, that looks like there might be more trailers one day, and then the next time you drove by, there was 5 of them. Yeah. There is an enforcement issue in Algonquin Highlands right now where that's happened, where somebody put their trailer on their property, and then their friend brought a trailer, and their other friend brought a trailer, and then they've got a fire pit, and now they've got an illegal campground. So, anyway, I mean, this is what these discussions are for. We know they happen, but that just because we know these transgressions are occurring contrary to our zoning bylaw doesn't mean that we say, well, it's okay now, we'll just let everybody do it. I think we need to look more at enforcement. Jen?
I get that we shouldn't change our bylaw just because we know things are happening. I wouldn't advocate for that, but notwithstanding the fact that we're probably not going to change anything on this today, I do feel it's worth stating that we are, by hook or by crook, sort of forcing a gentrification in our township with these sorts of rules, in which if you don't have the money to do a full house on your, on your private property, which you own outright, you basically are not welcome to stay on your private property. And I know no one intends to say that. I know that's not what we're trying to do, but I feel for, again, the 35-year-old couple with 2 kids who are just looking to come up and enjoy this beautiful space, and they found this gorgeous little lot, and they want to build on it, but they can't yet, or I feel like there are a lot of gates in the way of folk who just want to come up and enjoy this gorgeous corner of the world, the way that our fathers and grandfathers and forefathers and mothers did when they first arrived. It was a slow evolution. It just feels very gentrified right now.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but I also don't have a problem with it. That makes me sound snobby, and I apologize for that. That's not what I mean. But we're looking for community standard. I think I'm just about to say the thing that I think Liz is going to say. I'm reading her mind. So I'll go to Liz.
I feel pretty far from being gentrified. I think that we have done I mean, I know that there's lots of people with lots of money, that there's different standards of living here. But we've made, I think, great strides in reducing the size of homes that need to be built. I'm kind of stuck on, okay, you know, somebody's got a trailer on a property for a weekend, that's one thing. But when you're talking about them setting up like living in a trailer for any extended period of time, that's different. They don't meet the same building standards. They're in some cases just not safe. And I think that we've done a lot in reducing the square footage that's required for people to build. So I think we've opened the door to a lot more people by doing that. And just giving them more opportunity to be able to build that much sooner by being able to build something much smaller. I mean, I'd be an advocate for tiny homes if they were in the building code, but they're not yet. So, you know, I think we're working our way in the right direction. I just don't believe that trailers are the answer.
Yeah, and I think you didn't say what I thought you were going to say, and I think what you did say just now was a better way to phrase what I said prior to that. I think the challenge is that if you have that young couple with a couple of kids and they have a trailer and they found this lot and they want to stay there, they're not going to take that trailer away on Sunday. They're not going to go, where do they live in Toronto? They may live in an apartment. So where do they keep it? They're going to keep it on their vacant lot. Then they're going to leave their awning out. And like, we've had this conversation over the many years, and I'm not making sort of lofty and false assumptions. This is actually stuff we have traced through the years. And it's a temporary use until the patio stones go down and the tiki lights go out and the barbecue doesn't go anywhere. And now it's a dwelling, and that's what's not allowed. So, you know, the only other thing that, and Sean and Rick can weigh in on this, if somebody wants to have a trailer because they're building, they can do that now. So do you then, right now, we have bonds for people to live in a garage if they build a garage first and stay in it, or put up a bond to build a garage first, because you can't have an accessory dwelling, a building without a dwelling. You know, is there an opportunity there, or is that just opening up another can of worms of enforcement down back roads that we don't have anybody to undertake? So, Sean, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Sorry, to clarify, are you asking if it's possible to put up a bond to allow someone to use a trailer on a property until they're ready to construct? Is that?
Well, that's, I mean, in order to even seek any satisfaction for what Jen's saying, like you can't just, and I'm sorry, but you can't just go on the goodwill of people. I'm going to build. Yes, I am, but I'm going to live in my trailer until then. What if they don't build for 10 years? We have no way of monitoring that. And I mean, the community is full of trailers now that we can't find and enforce and make stop being used. I would hate to see us open that up for even more. I see hands. I saw a bunch of hands. I see Lisa Berry's hand, and then Sean, back to Sean.
I can understand some of the discussion on trailers and mobile homes, but I think when it comes to setting up a tent, I have a really hard time supporting it. And, you know, back to what Jen's saying about, you know, the young family wanting to do this, you know, if they can't, if they have to wait 10 years till they can buy, they might not even, by then they might not be able to afford the property that they have the dream on. Like property values and that are not going down.
No, they're not. That's especially now, we've seen that with the skyrocketing property costs. For sure. Sean?
Well, there's, you know, servicing concerns with a trailer, even more so with a tent. Where are these people going to the washroom? Where are they getting their water from? People buy properties with the understanding of what the zoning permits next to them. And they would be under the assumption now that camping is not permitted on the adjacent parcel. So to change that to allow camping next door to a residential property, it's conflicting land uses. And yeah, it's not something I'd be able to support from a planning perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not hearing any great, great hue and cry. I think there's some questions and some sort of hopes and dreams on the part of Lisa and Jen. Jen looks a bit resigned to an ultimate outcome, which she has already sort of said. So I would go to Liz and Julie. I mean, there's 5 of us here, and I'm certainly not prepared to modify the trailer part, and even to a certain extent the camping part. Does camping happen? Yes, it does. If somebody throws it, even though camping is technically not permitted, if somebody throws a tent out for a bridal party weekend or the kids having a night under the stars, again, I don't know why anybody would care about that. But if you do, to Sean's point, if you have somebody who buys land and pitches a tent and then has as we do, I've done lots of camping in my life, and you have a kitchen tent. What, do you then have a porta potty, or are you digging a hole in the bush? And compatible uses with neighbors, I think it just starts to get problematic, and then there's too many tentacles that you can't manage. So, I mean, I would look to Liz and Julie to weigh in on whether or not you're interested in furthering this discussion. Liz, go ahead.
I do not disagree with what's being proposed, with respect to trailers at all. Is there anywhere actually in our bylaw that references tents?
Just camping.
Because like I said, it happens all the time, and I can't see if somebody wants to have somebody for the weekend, or if somebody bought a piece of property and came up and pitched a tent for a couple of days and then packed up their tent and went away. I doubt that anybody would say anything about that. I think it's more of a long-term thing. But if we're talking about right now, the item on the table for discussion is trailers, and I agree with what's being proposed.
Yeah, and maybe we can ask Sean to separate that out. That's actually a really good point, Liz, is that the trailers and the terminology camping has morphed into whether or not you can pitch a tent. Sean's saying that you're not supposed to, but where does it say in our zoning bylaw that you cannot pitch a tent? Sean?
So it's more of the use. It's a camping use, which is not permitted in a residential zone. So a tent's not technically a structure, but you're using a tent for camping.
But if you, anecdotally or from a human perspective, if somebody pitches a tent for a weekend and they're using the bathroom in the house and they're showering in the house or the cottage, to me, that's no harm, no foul. So you can't, to Liz's point, you can't tell me that someone's going to go storming in there and tell them they have to pack up and go home. You're talking about the long-term use of a camping environment, which would include tents. Would that be accurate?
Yes, technically speaking, if you're setting up a tent in the backyard for the weekend, it's still not in compliance with the bylaw, but I'm not aware of any complaints being received for that. It is more of the longer term tents that remain in place for all of summer. Perhaps we might get a complaint about that, but it's not something we receive all that often.
So I would just be prepared to leave it as it is. And Liza says she's prepared to leave it as it is. Julie, did you have your hand up? I was asking you if you would.
I did. That's okay. Yeah, no, I'm okay the way it is. I think the whole basis of part of this conversation is affordable housing, which is a different discussion, which is something we definitely need.
Yeah, I mean, that conversation is happening at the county table through the City of Kawartha Lakes as a service provider and as a service manager and the housing plan. There are this is completely different from our zoning discussion, but yeah, that conversation is happening. The challenge with Algonquin Highlands, because it only has part of Dorset and a little corner of Carnarvon, until such time as there are different accommodations made for sewer and water, Algonquin Highlands will have a very hard time developing or meeting its housing targets because of town sewer and water, which we don't have and are unlikely to have. Jen?
I don't really see it as about affordable housing. I think that's a whole sector which is apart from what we're talking about really. This is more about a private property owner's right to enjoy their property, even if they don't have a permanent structure on it. You know, and it sounds like it's just something that we're going to have to just live with it, because I do understand all of the planning reasons behind it, but it is going to be hurtful for some to know that, you know, you can look across Livingston Lake Road and see 30 trailers there on public land, and you're not allowed to do that on your own land for a weekend. I understand we may not be able to get around it, but boy, you know, we're cottage country. We're all about come up and enjoy and be peaceful. And it's hard when you've got a chunk of land and you can't use it in that way, the way you wish to use it. But you can't win them all in planning. I completely get that. And if this is the only reasonable way forward, then so be it.
Okay, so that's, yeah, we'll leave that as it is then, and move on to the next section, which is derelict vehicles, another one of my favorites. Now I do know that we have talked about this in the past. I think we talked about this in our initial discussion. Sean had recommended that the language be changed from shipping container to cargo container so that it can be a little more all-encompassing. So he'll ensure that there's some consistency around that terminology throughout the document. I don't remember where we landed. I may have, I cannot understand why we are allowing derelict vehicles. That makes no sense to me at all. If they're derelict, fix them or get rid of them. Can anybody remember from, goes back to our very first meeting, which was many, many weeks ago, where we landed on that? I think I may have said the same thing at the same time, but John?
So I believe the previous or the current bylaw allows a maximum of 2 derelict vehicles. However, there was no requirement for screening from view, and we've now added a requirement that they be screened so you can't see them from off the property, essentially.
So does that mean that somebody could have, you know, a 10-acre piece of land and have 18 derelict RVs and 16 derelict cars, but because you can't see them from the road, they're okay?
Says 2.
Says 2. Sean, I'm being sarcastic because it's my neighbor.
Yeah, so it does say a maximum of 2, and it's only in the rural zone. So that would be your larger acreage lots.
Right. Okay, I mean, if everybody's fine with that, I know we talked about it before. This just really bugs me. I just couldn't remember where we landed, but if we're fine, that's fine. Move along. Oh, Jen.
Sean, where do boats fit into this? Because a lot of folk will pull their boat up in the fall and put a tarp over it and leave it. And sometimes the next summer they don't actually get it back in the water. And here's this big boat. So where does that fit here?
So similar to trailers, there's nothing prohibiting you from storing your own personal property on the property. It's when it becomes more of a permanent fixture and it's a derelict vehicle, then that's when it would fall under this section, and depending on which zone you're in may not be permitted.
Yes, but they're never derelict, Sean, because when I retire, I'm gonna fix up that old car. Okay, so are we okay there? As long as we've had screened from view, no more than 2, makes no sense to me, but let's move along. Okay, so check mark there. So the next section is the zone provisions. We have been through these. They've already been discussed, so I don't think we need to go through them. The only thing that we may want to take another quick look at, if council wants to, you don't have to, is just the EP zones, because there's some changes there. I think, is there not additions to that, Sean?
Yes, so coming from the official plan, there's 3 new zones, EP1, EP2, and EP3, which depending on which one you're in, there are different restrictions, but this is coming directly from the official plan.
Okay, and and on my chart, I don't have any notes from the first time around, and that tells me that we went through it and everybody's fine, we're good there. Similarly with the tables 1A, 1B, and 2, there were some revisions, but I don't think that we need to revisit them again because I believe we did that the last time. Would council concur with that? Yes. Okay, so I just need to find my little piece of paper here. Check mark, check mark, check mark. Maps, is there anything about maps that you want to take us through, Sean?
Really, the only changes to the maps are the additions of the EP1, EP2, and EP3 zones, as well as any site-specific zoning amendments, which have taken place since the last zoning bylaw update.
Okay, and so, but is council okay with accepting what's done to date? Anybody looking for any details? No, I see nodding heads. Then I would go back to where Liz tried to start us from at the beginning, is circling back to the overall document. We're not starting at page 1, but is there any sort of little hangnails left over that Liz, I think you might have a couple of other things that you wanted to tackle, or just get clarification on, or did you get those this morning?
I think that I have them all. My apologies. I understood when we started that you were sort of asking for us to do what I did. And I was wrong. I'm sorry. So now I've gone through them all, and I'm satisfied.
Excellent. So then Sean or Rick, but probably Sean, talk to us about next steps and what we'll see next and what we can expect going forward in the next couple of months.
Well, after this meeting, Rick and I will work towards making all the changes we've discussed from this meeting and our previous meeting, and present a final draft to council. I suspect we can do this at a regular meeting because it should just be a quick overview of the changes that we've already discussed. And at that meeting, we can bring forward some potential dates to start the public process with this proposal.
And I would imagine that similarly to how the county ran the shoreline bylaw open house, that the open house would be virtual, where folks could register to make comment or provide input into the draft. Is that what you're seeing?
That's what I would expect. I don't see holding any in-person meetings in the near future.
Yeah, fair enough. One of the things, and I know that we probably don't have a vast audience of the meeting. You know, I always say, have said for many years, if there's municipal business can be a bit confusing and boring unless you're on the inside sometimes. If there's one thing the public should pay attention to, it's the zoning bylaw. And so it's I think the most important piece of legislation that any municipality discusses and lays out for public consumption and feedback. And I would encourage as many people as possible to really take a breath, take some time to pay attention, look at the draft, look at the proposed changes, and provide us a feedback so that we can hear what people have to say, whether we like it or not, and then we can carry on in our decision making from that point on. Jen?
I wonder if I might ask for clarification on something one more time, on something that is not yet in the document that our good planning folk have suggested is not supposed to be in the document, and that's the dark sky policy. I've been thinking a lot about this over the last few weeks and realizing I don't think I understand yet how this is not a zoning issue, because there are whole stretches in our municipality where a dark sky at night would be absolutely appropriate. Then there are other stretches in our township or in any township, say in a commercial zone, where it's not necessarily appropriate to have a dark sky policy in that zone. And I guess I'm really struggling to not see how it fits here. How it, in SR1, SR2, we would want a dark sky, but in a more built up downtown Dorset, we may not need to see that. Could someone walk me through that again?
Yeah, Sean can, and that's one of the things I did make a note about, and he said it could come forward in a separate bylaw. So Sean, can you take us through that?
My preference would be to develop a more in-depth policy that would reference certain zones where dark sky, where the policies of that dark sky policy are to be implemented, as opposed to putting all those details into the zoning bylaw. Have a separate document that speaks to those requirements, and then reference the SR1, SR2 zones, and that you must meet these requirements in the policy.
Does that answer your question, Jen? I agree with you. I think we all do. It has been raised. The dark skies idea is really important, and there's been some. I don't follow a lot of Lake Association social media pages, but my attention has been drawn to a couple recently. There's been some pretty fierce battles, and we're people are saying it's my property, and if I want to have lights down to the lake that stay on all night, that's my business, and maybe it isn't. So it's a touchy topic. Part of me thinks if you're afraid of the dark, then maybe you should stay in the city. But I think there's a lot of value in putting something in place, because you're right. People come up to look at the stars and hear the loons and whatever it is they do at night, as opposed to having places lit up like the CN Tower. So, and again, it goes to our intent of appropriate viewscapes, which is entrenched somewhere as well. So I think we can direct. Did we direct Sean previously that we wanted to see something come forward, or are you looking for that now?
I'd like to see something developed about dark skies.
Yeah, I would. I mean, absolutely. So is that something that's already on your radar, or I mean, we can tell you, we can provide that direction now that we would like to see something come forward as regards dark skies and what's appropriate. And again, it's going to become an enforcement issue, because somebody could say, I'll put lights on if I want, and then who's going to go and check? So, we're governing, once again, governing for the bad apples. So are you okay with that, Sean?
Rick's got his hand up.
Rick, your hand is blending in with your ceiling.
Again, now, I don't know what the right type of thing is, so I'm gonna have to start wearing gloves. The whole issue of the dark sky compliant, I agree wholeheartedly with what Sean has said about setting up a separate policy on it. It's something that oftentimes is implemented through site plan approval. The only spot where I've tended to see it dealt with in zoning bylaws is setting up lighting standards in commercial parking lots particularly, but technically for related to parking areas and light standards. And that goes to defining them in the context that they're downward facing, and they actually have a whole bunch of dark sky compliant standards that can be applied. So eventually, once you get your policy in place, there may be an appropriate spot in the zoning bylaw for some requirement. More likely, you'll be doing it most through site plan approval. But I think I agree with everyone. It's an incredibly important part of our culture and our areas throughout cottage country, and you use there are different tools that you can use for them. But I think you're in the right direction on that.
Does that answer your question, Jen?
To the degree that it can, being a planning layperson, it does. I think the important takeaway for me is we're going to be doing something about it. That's the only thing that really matters. If this is not the right tool to do it, fine, so long as we're doing it. So yeah, I'm satisfied with that. I've got one more.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yep.
I wonder if I could also ask for a reminder of where we landed, specifically whether we gave instruction to staff to look at derelict buildings. Last time we discussed derelict vehicles and things like that, the question of derelict buildings was raised, and it was suggested that wouldn't be part of this because it has to do with the building code. Or I believe David offered some good insight as to why it didn't it didn't work in this document. Can someone remind me, did we give the instruction to start looking at a derelict building as part of a property standards bylaw? Or could we do that now if we haven't done that already?
Yeah, and I wonder, yeah, it's a good question because it comes up and we know that there are some challenges up in your neck of the woods. And that wouldn't be the only location. I don't know where we landed. Perhaps Angie or Sean can remind us where we landed on that. My notes from the last meeting, Jen, do say derelict building code, not zoning bylaw. But did we provide any direction to Jen's question? Did we actually do that, or did we just sort of float it around out there? What did we do? Do you remember, Angie?
There was no direction given. I think that it would be, if council was interested in, like we currently have a clean and clear bylaw, but we don't have a property standards bylaw, and that is a whole different animal.
Yeah.
Certainly has a whole different set of requirements as well. So, and that would be David that would look into that. So if that was council's direction, council could give that direction to David.
And I do see your hand, Jen, and I want to say that in previous terms of council, in creating the clean and clear bylaw, that was undertaken in that direction for a reason, which you've just sort of alluded to, because the property standards is a really big bite. So that report must exist somewhere. So maybe we could revisit that and just realign our brains as to the difference between the two. Again, here she goes again. The community is changing, and it may be time to just up the game on some of these things. If we, we're working obviously today, working really hard, talking ourselves in circles to try and make the right decisions for the right reasons to keep the community, on track. And it's a shame that we don't have or give ourselves the tools to make changes there. So if we can leave that, I'll go to Jen and then to Liz.
Yeah, I'd be grateful if we could revisit it. I know the last conversation about it was in a previous term, and in a way, with the changeover of council, it is a good opportunity to bring some tough questions back to see if some fresh light can be thrown on it, or if anything has changed. Certainly, the good folk of Ward 3 would appreciate if this term we were able to take a look at that once more. So it would be great if we could even table a conversation, even if we come out landing at the same space. I'd be grateful to have that conversation for my constituents.
Yeah, I think, because it's been raised a number of times, and we've also had some challenges with limitations of what we can and can't do. So I think I would agree that it is time. So if Angie can break that down and make that so number one. Liz, you had your hand up.
A couple of things. I agree completely. I really would like to look at property standards. There's two little things that I want to just get clarification on. They're kind of left over. I know I said it was finished.
Don't worry, we didn't believe you.
4.2.7 says that we should be limiting the size of stairs and ramps and landings in the front yard, I guess, of waterfront properties. But to what? It just says limit, but it doesn't, I don't know that it says anywhere limit how or to what.
Well, I think this drifted off into the fence discussion.
It did.
So, yeah. Sean, can you take a minute, or Rick, and just let us know where we are there? Sean?
Sorry, it's 4.2.7, which?
A.
A?
Is it A, Liz?
Sorry, I'm just killing ants.
I think it would be D and F, I believe.
Oh, sorry, it's D. Yes, it's D.
So this is referencing decks, balconies, steps, or patios, which are attached to a dwelling.
So not steps that are just steps down the front hill to the lake.
But I believe that the wording is that we limit them in size, but it doesn't say, it doesn't define that in any way.
But it doesn't say that.
Yeah, I'm missing that. I don't see that.
If you're talking about 4.2.7D, Liz, decks, balconies, steps, stairs, landings, and patios may project into any required yard a maximum distance of 6 meters from an existing building or structure, but no closer than 2 meters to any lot line or 12 meters to the high water mark. So it doesn't say limit. That's
Oh, I'm having a terrible time. This document will not scroll up and down easily. It's, I think it's in the chart.
Clause F, yeah,
Yeah.
clause F also was added to deal with the stairs, ramps, and landings. And it's basically set up that the width does not exceed 1.8 meters, and where there are landings, that they don't exceed the maximum area of 4.6 square meters on it. So there is a restriction on those to keep you from, again, if you're on a steeper lot, which may occur, and you may have stairs going down, this says you can do that, but they're basically 6 feet wide maximum with small landings as opposed to humongous decks going down there. So I think those restrictions are there, and I think that's what that was added.
Okay, perfect. The other one is just one final sealing of the issue of garden suites.
no.
Yeah, it's about, I think we landed on that they're not transferable, that the agreements for, the temporary agreements for garden suites are not transferable. But is there an ability, like if the new owner of the property had the same need, is there some mechanism within which they could reapply to keep it there? I'm assuming that the answer is yes.
Sean?
Yes, with the agreement not being transferable, they would just have to reapply all over again.
Okay.
To that point, Sean, in your review of the changes that we made last time in your report, in that on the second page, section 4.16.2, note that an agreement for a garden suite will expire upon the sale of the subject property. Should that be sale or transfer?
Yep, we can make that change.
That just if you could inherit a property, and then you could say, well, but I didn't buy it. There was no sale, so that covers any transfer of ownership. Okay.
But there is still the ability for them to apply and continue it on. That's all I was concerned about.
Yeah, because you're right. It could be just a continuation of caregiving or other needs. All right. Anything else from you, Liz?
That's it, I promise.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, so we've heard from Sean that, does anyone else have anything they want to circle back on without reopening without talking about garden suites again? So Sean and Brooke will make the changes. They'll bring a final draft to a regular meeting, at which meeting we'll also talk about dates for the public process and then let that get going. Is there anything else anybody wants to talk about in relation to today's discussion? Liz.
Just a comment, don't worry. I was just going to say that it's given the fact that we're delayed somewhat and it may lead us into having our open house with that isn't in the summer months. But the nice thing about that is that if we're doing it by Zoom, people can participate from anywhere. And so, it's kind of a win-win. One of the very few small wins of Zoom meetings and pandemics.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Thank you to Sean and Rick for their work on this. And may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Is that what we're receiving? I'm looking at the clerk. I feel like I'm faded off into somewhere. Councillor Dayu and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
By Councillor Dayu, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved, the council acknowledge receipt of planning report PL 7221, prepared by Sean O'Callaghan and Rick Hunter, dated August 26, 2021, regarding proposed zoning bylaw update.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw? Councillor Shortreed and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
By Council Short, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson, be it resolved that bylaw 2021-93 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council during its August 26, 2021 special meeting be received and read a first time, considered read a second, third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And may I have a mover and a seconder for the adjournment? Councilor Short, Councilor Berry.
By Councilor Short, second by Councilor Berry, be it resolved that the August 26, 2021 special meeting council be adjourned at 1:59 p.m.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.